This is LBC from Global, leading Britain's conversation with James O'Brien.
It's 3 minutes after 10. A very good morning to you. There is an amber weather warning in place. I don't know if you're aware of this. I don't know where you're listening. Perhaps you have me on in a darkened room with the curtains closed and no real inkling of what's going on outside. But do be careful, seriously. Make sure you stay hydrated and wear a decent sun cream because it is going to be a scorcher. I'm obsessed with this pie chart. It comes round in cycles. Sometimes I go for weeks without starting a show, not having looked at it. And then I forget about it for weeks and almost marvel, goggle-eyed at it when I stumble across it again. I'm referring to the pie chart that shows the components of UK government spending. You remember pie charts, don't you, from school? The ones with the slices. The ones where you can sort of see in a glorious technicolor how something breaks down in percentage terms. On this occasion, health, social security, education, the interest that we pay on debt, defence, transport, public order and safety, long-term care, housing and community amenities. One of the most interesting things about this pie chart is you can barely see the slice that is spent on overseas aid. Isn't that bizarre, given how much rhetoric is dedicated to it? So I imagine, in fact, it's such a small proportion of spending in 22-23 that it doesn't even get a figure. They've got numbers on all the others, but this one's actually too small to fit on. It's less than 1.5% is all I can tell you. Quite possibly less than 1%. So you've got this pie chart, green bit, yellow bit, blue bit, red bit. I would call that teal, that bit there, but I don't know whether that's the official colour. Speaking of teal, if there's a song by a popular beat combo called Wonder Horse, called Teal, which is among the most beautiful songs I think I've ever heard. I don't give you musical recommendations very often, but that song, if that song doesn't squeeze something out of your heart, then it must be a cold, dry organ that you have lurking in the middle of your rib cage. It's a anyway, I digress. So there's teal, there's blue, there's pink, there's purple, there's yellow, there's a sort of salmon. Imagine that. And then there's black. There's a black slice for overseas aid. And it's by far the thinnest, and you can barely see it. How many right-wingers have you heard suggest we could solve this problem if we just stop spending money on overseas aid? Or we could solve that problem if we just stop spending so much money on overseas aid. Or we could solve this problem if we just stop spending money on overseas aid. I could go on. And they often, well, they always do. It sometimes seems to be almost the only arrow in their quiver. We need to stop spending this money on overseas aid, and then we'd be able to have the biggest army in the world. Then we'd be able to give pensioners £100 million each. Then we'd be able to have unicorns for school dinners. Just need, but of course it is, in the great scheme of things, relatively negligible. The biggest is other, which is unhelpful, 24.3% on other. But if you look at the ones that are specified, 18.3% on health, as you probably expect. That works out as almost £1 in every 5 that is spent. And on social security for pensioners, which is going to be mostly the old age pension, you're looking at 12.2%. The second highest spending. So you've got the health service, which is going to be disproportionately spent on older people, isn't it? I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. You get alert as you get older. You need the ministrations of the National Health Service more as you get older. You can see this on the back, as Veronica reminds me, of your annual tax code reminder as well. Another thing that was negligible in the great scheme of things was the payments that we made to be members of the European Union, as she reminds me. But don't you worry. They're not called slices, thank you, Mr. Numbervator. They are called sectors. I'm happy to correct that. But the sector spent on old age pensioners and the sector spent on health is together combined over 30%. Over 30%. So that's sort of over £3 in every 10 that the Treasury spends. It spends on the health service and or the old age pension. And I am going to remind you that the old age pension, having the old age pension means you're more likely to be also in receipt of National Health Service ministrations and treatments. International aid has been cut further since this pie chart was assembled. This is 22-23, 2022-2023. So now you have social security, working age and children. So this would include universal credit and disability benefits. So, and it's about 10%. 10.2%. So your child benefit, your disability benefit, your universal credit, your housing benefit, I presume. No, housing and community amenities gets a separate slice. Sector, sorry, Mr. Numbervator, but that's 1.5%. So this sector, marginally bigger than education. We spend a little bit more on social security for adults of working age, i.e. not pensioners, and children. And that is the sector that Keir Starmer has gone after. That is the sector that people keep telling us we cannot afford to keep paying for. Nobody ever says it about the sector just above, do they? The 12.2, well, that's not true. The winter fuel allowance was an attempt to trim some of the money from the 12.2% of public expenditure that goes to old age pensioners. But unless you are earning over, or unless you are in receipt of over £35,000 a year, you have now been spared that trimming exercise. You will be just as well off next year as you were last year, and a significant proportion of your income will be coming from the state, will be coming from the Treasury. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that, but I'm interested in highlighting the difference in tone that surrounds this conversation. What would happen to a politician who called, for example, for the old age pension to be means tested? What would happen? Would it be political suicide? I talk a lot on the programme about pendular, which is probably not the plural of pendulum, but I've kind of decided that it is for the purposes of our time together every morning. Pendulums swing, empires fall. The pendulum of pensioners, I think, will swing as the demographics of this country change. What I found particularly interesting about the winter fuel climb down was the way in which that 35 came up again yesterday, didn't it? That £35,000 threshold was so profoundly offensive to so many people who are currently working all the time and are not earning anything like that kind of money. To be told that pensioners who are earning or receiving that kind of money were going to get even more help really offended sensibilities, but it was politically astute. It addressed public opinion, which is partly tied up in that old misconception that everybody in receipt of the old age pension was fighting in the Battle of Britain. That strange lady from one of the reality television shows we played a clip of, who'd been talking to Tom Swarbrick and saying it's outrageous that they're taking away this. They fought for us. And of course, the massive majority of them did nothing of the sort. So we've got that weird situation in place. 12.2% of public expenditure goes on the old age pension, and 10.2% goes on social security for working age and children, and that is the sector, the slice of the pie that Keir Starmer elected to target. And two things can be true at the same time. It may not be the biggest sector, but it may be the least sustainable. I'd have thought pensioners were probably more worrying as a demographic constituency, because they're going to get bigger and bigger and bigger. And the number of people paying into the pot, the working age population, is potentially going to get smaller, especially if these continuing rhetorical flourishes regarding immigration are not nipped in the bud. Everyone keeps promising to cut immigration, i.e. to cut the working age population more and more and more, even as the non-working age population, the above the working age population, gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Result? I'll tell you what the result is. You're going to be working till you're 206. Unless you're lucky enough to have accrued enough capital to retire. And if you have accrued enough capital to retire, well, great news. If you're on less than 35 grand a year, you're going to get help with your fuel bills. Just seems a little bit unjust to me. I could be wrong, but by the time I reach retirement age, I think it will be just disappear. You know those dreams, those anxiety dreams where you can't quite reach the place that you're going? That's what retirement age is going to be like for my generation. I'll be just nearly there now, nearly 60. Oh, sorry, it's 68. Oh, is it 69 now? 70, 71. Did I say 71? I meant 72. 73, actually, for Capricorns. Unlucky. People call James 74. It's just going to... nearly there. So why did Keir Starmer elect to target this section of society? Yesterday, I made a discovery. You, not for the first time, opened my eyes to something that I'd previously missed. The disaster of Keir Starmer's welfare bill was that people on the left felt that it was cruel and addressing the narrative of scrounging, which it wasn't, And people on the right thought that it wasn't attacking scroungers enough and was not going to do enough to bring down the overall bill that the country pays, that we pay in order to look after people who need a little bit of help, particularly in the context of the 10.2%, people who are on disability and sickness benefits. Why did he do it? Why did he go after that section of society? That's a question I want you to have bubbling away in the back of your brain as I invite you to ring in to answer a different one. How big a mess has he made of this? If you're not across the story, you should know that the climb down essentially means that nobody who has been calling LBC for the last few months to describe how scared they were about the imminent impact of this cut, nobody is going to be affected. Only people who sign up anew for it from next November are going to be denied access to what everybody who's already on the books, on the disability and sickness benefits books, will receive. A lot of mileage expended yesterday, a lot of energy expended yesterday on mollifying the rebels, chief among whom Meg Hillier and Debbie Abrahams were in 24 hours of talks. I mean, not non-stop, I'm sure they went to bed. But the bottom line is, it is being presented as another U-turn. It is being presented as a platform of massive concessions. And it is, however you want to cut it, I'm afraid, it is the polar opposite conduct of what Keir Starmer insisted he would be doing for the last few weeks. We've lost one front bencher already, the government will be saying to itself, and we can't afford to lose any others. Therefore, we need to reach this agreement. They've offered massive concessions, which should be enough to get the bill over the line at a second reading. We always wanted to protect the most vulnerable, not to destroy the bill or cause the government trouble. We always hoped there would be an off-ramp, and that's what we have now. So government and rebels trying to portray this as a successful listening exercise. I think 6 months ago I'd have joined in, but there's been too many now. The winter fuel allowance and now the welfare bill were both tattooed onto the foreheads of Labour MPs. They had to bang on doors, they had to go out on the stoop and sell these policies to the people and insist that they were necessary. Insist that they were necessary. And then they said suddenly, oh no, they weren't necessary after all. I don't know what you do for a living. I'm trying to think what the equivalent would be in your job. You're sort of assured by your boss that something is absolutely necessary, even though it's unpopular. And you pass that on to your customers or your clients, your voters, and you deal with all the flack that's thrown up as a consequence. I don't think there's an equivalent in my world. You deal with all the flack that has been thrown up as a consequence. And then just as you're sort of dusting yourself down, picking yourself up and starting all over again, they announce that, no, actually, we're not going to do that. I don't know that this is actually as egregious as the winter fuel climb down, but I do know that the tone of political reporting has changed, and it's changed so much that you have to begin to ignore it. There's not going to be a leadership challenge anytime soon. Keir Starmer is in the job for another 4 years, possibly, before he has to call a general election. He might call one sooner, and yet, something about this story speaks to something, as we touched on yesterday, as we discussed yesterday. Something about this story speaks to something that runs a lot deeper. I suppose what I want to know from you is whether you're going to buy the idea that it is the result of a successful negotiation, or whether Keir Starmer now looks like somebody who can never stick to his own guns on the really big stuff. On the stuff that his own MPs don't like. Fair play to the fella for sticking to his guns on farmers and VAT on private school fees. I like the workers' rights bill. I like the renationalisation. There's quite a lot I like, and I'll run you through some of it shortly because no one else in the British media is going to. But these two huge attempts to save the government money, and I think you have to be very undergraduate to think that is an unnecessary mission. You can, of course, reach immediately for a wealth tax, or you can immediately claim that we should be getting money from here, there, or everywhere. And I think there's some truth in that. But they're a mobile population, the mega rich. They're a very mobile population, more so perhaps than ever. And while a lot of the stories reporting an exodus of billionaires and millionaires turn out on closer examination to be a load of old toot, that there is only so much you can do before the pips squeak. And what they have attempted to do is trim spending. And you tell me how you respond to this latest development from Keir Starmer's government. 0345 6060 973, because the fear is that the people who welcome the climb down will not be improving their opinion of Keir Starmer. Is that right? Is that you? I'm glad he's climbed down, but I don't like him more as a consequence. I guess what I want you to tell me, and sorry for taking so long to get there, but I wanted to get a few other thoughts up and running this hour. I guess what I want you to tell me is what this makes you think of him, the Prime Minister. What this makes you think of him. And as ever on this programme, your opinion will always be more interesting if it is changing. If you thought he was absolutely awful or absolutely brilliant last week, last month, last year, and you still do, then great. But there's not a lot I can do with that. There's not a lot to explore, is there? There's not a lot to dig into. There's not a lot to explain. So, you buy into nonsense like two-tier Keir or whatever the latest far-right trope might be. That's great. Good luck to you. But it's not very interesting. It's not very intellectually nourishing to examine how your mind works. What I am interested in is why things are changing. I'll examine why my own mind is changing a bit at the moment. I haven't quite pinned it down because, at least at first today, I'm more interested in you. So how does... And what I can't do is separate the media coverage from the reality. I'll show you what I mean. Massive concessions on welfare bill win over key Labour rebels. One front page. I'm not going to tell you which ones they are. Starmer caves in to rebels on benefits. Starmer caves in to rebels on benefits. Don't worry, I'm not repeating myself. That's two different front pages. New hope on pips. You see what I mean? A completely different tone, message, delivery. Labour rebels force Starmer to water down benefits cuts. All of that. What I can't do is distinguish between what we actually think and feel about the actions that have been undertaken and how much of what we think and feel is a consequence of being conditioned by coverage, of which we're part, aren't we? We are coverage. You and me, when we talk about stuff, are providing coverage. So let's cut away if we can. Let's cut through the noise. How does this particular move, this concession, this surrender, this back down, how does it affect your thoughts and feelings about Keir Starmer? 0345 6060 973. It's 20 past 10.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 22 minutes after 10, and the thing that I would point to first as to why I can feel my own sands shifting is I don't know what the point of this was. Apart from saving money, I don't know what the point of it was. Even after all the phone-ins we've done, all the conversations we've had, the long queues of people telling me that it was going to hurt them and that they didn't deserve to be hurt, and almost all of them sounding sincere and sympathetic, like people who should not have been having their living conditions compromised or reduced. So what was... And if there is some holy grail here, it was not communicated either to me, as someone who has to pay attention for a living, or to you, or crucially, to Labour MPs. And that's why I'm beginning to think that there's something pretty rotten in the state of Downing Street. Robin's in Whitehaven. Robin, what would you like to say?
Hello, James. I'm totally not surprised by this. I've watched Keir Starmer's rise. I used to be a member of the Labour Party, and I left when he was elected leader.
So just to be clear, you are in precisely the category that I was very rudely castigating a moment ago. You're someone who never liked him, didn't like him then, and doesn't like him now.
Well, I didn't like his actions.
That's fine. I mean, but you haven't changed as a consequence of anything that's happened in the last 6 months.
No, if anything, I did contemplate rejoining the Labour Party, but then after I've seen this, there's no chance. I think Starmer's got to go. I think he was known as Captain Flip-Flop when he was in the opposition. He's just weak. I don't think he has any political anchor. He's got himself surrounded by people who were talentless. And I think what he should have done, I think he should have held fast and seen this through, and he should have threatened the rebel MPs with removing the whip.
So you like the policy as it stood? You like the cuts to the disability and sickness benefits?
Obviously, there's going to be people who would genuinely need this disability money. There's got to be, but there's always going to be people who are pulling the wool over the eyes. So,
but the bill wasn't really designed to identify them.
Well, that's the problem. So then you've got to go to the people who come up with the bill, and could they implement it without the people who genuinely need it? So that's part of the problem.
Yeah, now, but you wanted the bill to stay in place, even though you're describing the people as who put it together as being talentless and useless.
Well,
it's a bit of there's a bit of a contradiction there. So they've done something really rubbish, but you're really cross that they're not carrying on with it.
I'm not saying the bill was totally rubbish.
Oh, sorry.
The idea
just the
was
people
right.
just the people who put it together are totally rubbish.
No, the idea was right, James.
What's the idea? What's the idea? Because this is what eludes me at the moment.
Well, cutting welfare spending has to, it can't keep growing and growing and growing. There has to be some kind of control on welfare spending.
Even if the old age pension is going to carry on growing and growing and growing, no one ever talks about reducing that.
Well, that should be an option. You mentioned earlier
social security as well.
Testing.
Yes, I'd love to see the politician who tried that. So you recognise the need to somehow cut the spending, and you didn't really care, if we're honest, about how it was done, because now you're cross that it's not going to be done anyway. And all of the people who've been queuing up to describe to me the fears they had for the future and the damage this would do to their already, in many ways, compromised lives. I mean, that's the bit that's confusing me about your position. You like the bill? Yes or no?
Well, I would like to have welfare spending under control.
Yeah, see, that's the problem, isn't it? Is that you don't actually know whether you welcome the climb down or not, because neither of us know whether or not the bill was going to do the things that you think needs to be done and which he said was going to be done. Why did you resign from the Labour Party, just out of interest, if you're in favour of welfare cuts?
Why did I
resign from the Labour Party if you're in favour of welfare cuts?
I just thought when you have a leader who flip-flops as much as Keir Starmer does, I could see this
what were the big flip-flops in opposition?
The big flip-flops in opposition is he wouldn't really take a stand on anything. You know what I mean?
Well, that's not a flip-flop, is it?
Jeremy Corbyn was a friend, then he said he wasn't really a friend, and I could see that coming down the line. And
there
the people, I could just see the people.
So, can you name a flip-flop? A flip or a flop? A flop or a flip? Because, I mean, you've now gone from saying that he flip-flops all the time to saying he doesn't actually take a stand that he could flip-flop from.
There's a lot of flip-flops there, James.
Well, give me one.
No, I'm saying you're saying a lot of flip-flops.
Well, I'm flopping and flipping and flipping and flopping because you can't name one.
If you're going to make a decision, see it through.
Yeah, well, you can keep saying that. I've got no idea why you resigned from the Labour Party, except that you're upset that he's not friends with Jeremy Corbyn anymore, which is fine. 28 after 10. Coral's in Newport. Coral, what would you like to say?
Well, I didn't catch your last speaker, but I would like to say that I'm impressed that because I was waiting for you to talk to you.
Really. Sorry, I do apologise.
That I think that he is good, and I was also I stayed a Labour Party member. I'm still a Labour Party member, but I didn't. I really did like Jeremy Corbyn, and I thought he treated Jeremy Corbyn badly, and I also thought he's been very bad on Palestine. But I actually have seen some humanity and some compromise with his U-turns. So I'm much happier.
Conciliatory?
Yes.
It's a nice word, isn't it?
Well, no, okay. I know he's bowed to pressure, but he didn't bow to pressure. There was plenty of pressure from the Labour Party before he was elected, and he could have been a strong man. If he believed in being a strong man, he could be a strong man.
You've done it. You've absolutely cut to the heart of it, haven't you? Is there is a stupidity in insisting that you will never change your mind. You know, you turn if you want to. The lady's not for turning. But there is something equally bad about what the last chap was describing as flip-flopping. And there are examples of flip-flopping since he became leader of the Labour Party. There aren't many from when he was in opposition. But the pendulum swings, and the pivot point, Coral, is going to be in a different place for almost all of us, isn't it? So you're still seeing this as collegiate and conciliatory, or with a little bit of strong arm. Other people, like the last caller, will be thinking, how do I ever know if he's going to stick to his guns? Because he keeps backtracking, he keeps flip-flopping, he keeps U-turning.
I think you've got to be a kind of a bit of a fanatic. I think the people who and I've got friends on either side of that divide, and I spent my life feeling I'm in bad faith because I still stayed in the Labour Party, because all my friends, the ones who've gone off the BBC, they've gone, they're left wingers.
Yes.
And they see it very clearly. And I also can see it and actually agree with them about the policy. I would much prefer us to be a proper socialist.
And yet,
the reality of it.
Well, yes, and yet, I mean, if we were to marry together the first two calls of the day, you've got someone who accepts or someone who endorses the absolute inevitability of trying to cut the welfare bill, and somebody who, if you'd allow me to say, perhaps somewhat idealistically, thinks that we can meet those costs indefinitely and infinitely. Before you go, shall I try to make you laugh?
Yes, go on.
What do you call a Frenchman wearing sandals?
You have to tell me.
Philippe Flop.
I'm afraid
what?
A groan emerged.
Well, that was not a groan. That was a hearty chuckle, Coral. It's 10:31. Thomas Watts has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 10:34. One of my favourite political commentators. You know when you see a byline and you think to yourself, I'm going to get stuck into this. I need a bit of help. Is the Times journalist Patrick Maguire, and he writes today under the headline "Backbench Revolt Shows Labour Hasn't Changed." About the kind of systemic problems that now exist in the relationship between Downing Street and the parliamentary party. We learnt instead this week that despite Starmer's claims to be leading a changed Labour Party, the instincts of the people who make up his majority are disarmingly ordinary. For listeners of a certain age, he draws a comparison with that Campari advert that featured Lorraine Chase and Leonard Rossiter. Are you from Paradise? Nah, Luton Airport. A fatal number of them cannot stomach the responsibility for removing benefits from disabled people. Nobody reprogrammed their brains. They are utterly conventional 21st century Labour politicians, which is to say that they are the sort of garden variety liberal lefty some people around the Prime Minister dismiss as insufficiently serious for high office. And I'm part of that problem. I can't stomach the idea of removing benefits from disabled people. And the first caller, Robin in Whitehaven, thinks it is absolutely necessary. I mean, a little bit of confusion as to how we can be confident that it was actually not going to affect people who don't deserve to be affected. But that's the point, isn't it? Either you can stomach the idea of removing benefits from disabled people or you can't. And I can't, but I'm not in power. I don't have to do the sums. I don't have to make the numbers add up. I can't do it. And you can tell me until you're blue in the face about people who are receiving the benefit that don't receive it. And it won't change my position, because until you can somehow prove to me that you are only going to target the undeserving disabled or the undisabled disabled, I don't want to live in a country that takes help away from people who need it the most, especially not when we've seen a concentration of wealth at the very top of the pyramid over the last 20 or 30 years that is, to my mind, completely obscene, truly obscene in every sense of the word. I think that is the heart of the matter. Either you can stomach it or you can't. And that perhaps is where the clash between pragmatism and principle comes in. What if we have to? What if we have to take money away from disabled people, whether they are, quotes, deserving, end quotes, of it or not? Because the alternative is, and then of course you can always point at something else, can't you? You can always point at, well, why are we building nuclear planes? Why are we giving money to pensioners for the winter fuel. Why? You can always do that. So you'll never win the argument that you have to do this. Politics is bloody stupid sometimes, isn't it? But, of course, the effective politicians are the ones that can somehow rise above it. And Starmer keeps, it seems to me, keeps getting dragged under by events and latterly by his own MPs. Simon's in Bath. Simon, what would you like to say?
Morning, James. Lovely to speak to you.
Likewise.
That concept of rising above it actually chimes with what I was going to contribute, because I can't help but take a long-term view of these things, whether it's the fact that the winter fuel allowance is now means tested when it previously wasn't, and that come November next year, the belt is tightened somewhat on who's eligible for disability payments. In the short-term, news cycle, the headlines, the back and forth, it looks like, weakness of leadership and this, that, the other. But if the long-term goal, and they're talking about a two-parliament plan, if their long-term goal is to tighten public expenditure where it can be tightened, then aren't these things a win if you take a step back from them? Aren't they progress?
Yeah, well, I think you're giving me the pragmatics, aren't you? You're giving, because and I'm giving you the emotions. I'm going to repeat the phrase I cannot stomach, as Patrick Maguire puts it in the Times this morning, the responsibility for removing benefits from disabled people. And we're doing that thing that often happens on the programme, where the brain and the heart are in conflict with each other. You're providing an intellectual rationale that I cannot find fault with, but my emotional self, my gut as it were, can't stomach it.
Yeah, and I feel that too. I mean, specifically in the context of taking money from disabled people. I mean, it's such a visceral thing. And when, my personal mantra is a bit more tax for people who can afford to pay a bit more tax.
Yes.
And arguably a lot more for people who can afford to pay a lot more. There's definitely money there. I could pay a bit more tax. I'd rather it wasn't taken out of the pocket of someone that struggles to get around town.
Same.
But in the long run, I just think that all of the kind of bluster around, whether there's going to be a leadership contest, and is this signal of weakness, and is the I know, because in the long run, if what they're trying to achieve is change in the right direction for the country, if the initial position, if you see it in a kind of, to use that sort of Trumpian word, transactional, if you see it in the idea that you initially put something on the table of, we're going to strip away winter fuel from all of these people, or PIT from all of these people, and people go, well, hang on a minute, that's a bit much. And then you kind of row back from that initial position, and what you end up with is painted by the right-wing press as a failure and a humiliation, but actually you're further forward. You've ratcheted things up from the starting position.
So we are further along the road of reform than we were before we started, albeit that these enormous potholes, some of which may have been exaggerated and embellished by media, and some of which, of course, have been dug by my own MPs, Keir Starmer will be thinking, we are nonetheless ahead of where we were when it started. In the context of pursuing cuts to public spending, whether or not the cuts. I like the way you think, I really do. But neither of us can get past this tension between the intellectual and the emotional. And I'll give you an example. This is from Jane. Some of you may die, but that's a risk I'm willing to take. Is 100% Starmer, Reeves, Kendall and Timms. The callousness is brackets, almost close brackets, funny. I'm not hearing that at all. Some of you may die, but that's a risk I am willing to take. But Jane is. That's the, if you like, the turbocharged version of not being able to stomach cuts to disability. He's nailed it. That once you get that on the table, that's why I've been so confused by this, confused by my own thoughts and feelings. If you have been successfully persuaded that everyone's swinging the lead, that everybody in a Motability car has lied, or the next door neighbour's got one and he's only got mild asthma, or he's only got an ingrowing toenail, and you find one example, because there's always examples, and you use that to believe that everybody deserves to suffer, then you're fine. If you accept that there is too much money being spent, but you can't explain how you're going to save it, then you end up where Keir Starmer has ended up, because the people who cannot stomach the idea of removing benefits from disabled people need a heck of a lot of persuading, and they haven't done the persuading. There it is. We got there in the end. They haven't done the persuading, which is why they've had to back down. Peter is in Liverpool. Peter, what would you like to say?
I'm just going back to one of the first things you put there about why do we like Starmer, or do we like Starmer? And he came in as head of CPS. He was principled and strong. He was a good appointment. There was a hope of trust and openness in government. And he changed the Labour Party. But he seems to have changed a number of times along the way. I feel as though he's got himself in a position now where he's listening to a kind of a coterie. He's fallen into a kind of Johnsonian trap of chasing public opinion and media headlines, but he's getting headlines for the wrong reason. And in the process, he's lost the principles of the fact that society exists so that we can support those who need support, i.e. tax the rich, pay the poor.
I don't think you win elections on that platform. I don't think you ever did. I don't think anyone ever has. Really.
I agree with you. You don't. But there has to be... it's a very, very grey line down the middle, but he's on the wrong. He's pushing himself and the Labour Party onto the wrong side of that, and he needs to make a couple of mistakes, if I can use the word right mistakes, to show his principles, which the country won't like, but is in the right direction. He's made mistakes on the wrong side of the line.
I understand what you're saying. I like that. I like that analysis. Well, I don't know if the heating allowance history will judge that to have been such a big error, actually. I think, particularly if you're comparing it to what we have now with this £35,000 threshold. Simon's points previous to your call about means testing is now there, notwithstanding both of these climb downs seem to me to be failing to solve the confusion that caused the problem in the first place.
Yes, but it's the thing. It's like if you go back to the heating allowance.
Yes,
he made the mistake. He's gone back and he's adjusted it.
Yes,
but they're not analysing stuff enough to begin with to say, God, if we do that, we slam everybody with that. This is gonna cause. Why don't we just finesse it before we announce it? And take a bit longer.
Yeah, and that's beginning to look like a feature, not a glitch, isn't it? In the Downing Street operation. Could you have sold this differently? There was one rather good analysis I read yesterday that suggested they really regret going in on the 5 billion, because the minute you start talking about this being designed to save money, the narrative of scrounging will get louder, whether you want it to or not, and they obviously didn't want it to, but that becomes what everybody thinks the focus is. If they'd gone in almost with case studies of people who, this is how we will help someone like this get back to work, which, guess what, not only improves their existence, their dignity and their life quality, but also saves the Treasury some money as well. So if you'd almost turned the savings into a happy bonus rather than the point of the policy, it could have landed very differently with the public.
It could have done, especially with the phrase, we have looked at this carefully, we have considered this carefully, and as you say then, case studies. But again, you're fighting against the double whammy that's in place for years. From Reform, the Tory party, everything, they must be scroungers. It's built into the national psyche.
It's just we can't. That is that never the twain shall meet, isn't it? It's people who've swallowed the scrounger narrative and people who can't stomach the idea of taking benefits away from disabled people. I don't know if it's a Venn diagram, Peter. I don't know if there's an intersection, and but that's the thing they can never nail down. It's not unlike immigration, is it? When people keep claiming that they've only got a problem with certain types of immigration, but you know that they're being used by people who've got a problem with all foreigners, full stop. It's very hard to know where the lines are, where the difference is. But I think, and to go back to where you began your call, you thought Starmer would be the guy to do the clever, unconfusing explanations that we've ended up talking about, and so far he hasn't.
The right thing.
Yeah.
That's what. However convoluted, and however he had to go about it, he'd have to do some things that people didn't like, but he's chosen to do them in the wrong way, or he's picked on things that he shouldn't have done.
Take your medicine. Go on.
That Venn diagram, where it does cross, the line is about as wide as that pie chart with the national international aid on.
I think you're probably right. I really do. You can all find that pie chart, by the way. I think you get it on your own tax code, or the Institute of Fiscal Studies will have it on their website. Thank you, Peter. 10:46 is the time. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Just a word, because I know I sometimes come across as a bit of a bruiser, but do you see why I prefer talking to people whose minds have changed? I just think it's more interesting for you to listen to. So my apologies if you're, offended by that. There'll be lots of things we can talk to each other about, but it's just not very interesting to hear, I've always hated him and I still do, or I've always loved him and I still do. I need to see the workings. Otherwise, I don't understand. And that's what we're trying to do together every day, is just understand things a bit better, even if we don't like what we find. 10:47 is the time.
James O'Brien on LBC.
People, writes Mikey, would stop talking about pie charts. I'm definitely getting hungry now. My apologies, Mikey. I take your point. I mentioned to you, I think for the first time this week, that however serious the subject matter is, you do sometimes make me smile during the breaks when I look at some of the texts I haven't been able to get to while we were on air. That was another example. I quite like this from Joe as well. He says, we're either governed by total idiots or evil geniuses. I think that's sometimes the media narrative, isn't it? This is neither funny nor unhelpful from Aaron. I voted Labour. I'm glad they got in. I wouldn't change my vote. But it's not the change I thought I would see. There's a joke there, isn't there, waiting to be written. Let me finish this first. I was hoping for a phoenix-like rebirth of Clement Attlee, but I'm worrying that what I'm getting instead is a second Ramsay MacDonald. He promised to be the candidate of change, didn't he? He promised that he would be the candidate of change, but so far all he's changed is his mind. I think that's quite a good joke. No, it's all about delivery. I could write it for someone else, but I don't know that I could deliver it myself. Ollie's in Surbiton to return to the question of how all of this is affecting views of Keir Starmer. Ollie, what would you like to say?
Well, James, I actually really feel for him in many ways. I think he's the leader of a party that, arguably, whilst they all go to the same school, they all hang out in different parts of the playground. I think that's become quite obvious.
Well, that again, to blow even more smoke up Patrick Maguire's fundament, that's the point he makes so powerfully, is that Morgan McSweeney, this sort of key advisor, senior advisor in Downing Street, widely credited with masterminding the election victory, he was supposed to deliver a very loyal, very even perhaps pliant party, and they thought that that's what they'd got with the new intake and with the successful sort of shutting down of the further left wing of the party. But it hasn't happened, as you say. They're still all hanging out in different corners of the playground.
Yeah, they are. And I think, he's trying to deal with issues in pretty much every area that could cause him an issue within the UK. And I think, as we say, the party he's leading that traditionally does lean to the left in a world that appears to be sort of like careering further and further to the right every day.
Yes.
And he's trying to balance, satisfy conventional Labour views and policy with the need to actually fix some things and to approach the things that are broken. And I think sometimes the answer is, and he's learned quite quickly, is, well, I am going to have to do things that make people unhappy. I am going to do things that traditionally my party wouldn't have been on board with 10 years ago and clearly aren't now. I don't envy the guy whatsoever. I really don't.
No, and he clearly has the best interests of the country at heart. Clearly,
100%,
which you could
100%.
not say about Boris Johnson or Liz Truss. I mean, for the record, I think David Cameron did as well in his own absurdly patrician way. But he clearly has the best interests of the country at heart. But you can't persuade somebody who is retching in disgust at the idea of taking money away from disabled people, taking benefits away from disabled people, that he has a moral compass. And I can see the problem. I mean, you can hold two thoughts in your head at the same time. I can't get past that line I read out earlier. A fatal number of them cannot stomach the responsibility for removing benefits from disabled people. And I'd be one of them, I think. Yeah,
I mean, personally, I think he is in the right place politically. I really do. But I think he's very quickly learning the importance of not over-promising unless you're absolutely certain that you can deliver on that.
And possibly the differences between campaigning and governing, which may be the big lesson, and may see some changes in personnel at Downing Street. The tensions, if you like, between Morgan McSweeney's closest allies and the actual parliamentary Labour Party appear to be unsustainable, perhaps intolerable. And I don't mention the fella much because he's not Dominic Cummings, and most people listening probably haven't got a Scooby-Doo who Morgan McSweeney is, and I don't want to be the person who denudes them of that blissful ignorance. But until he drives to Barnard Castle in the middle of a nationwide lockdown and lies about it being a necessary journey, necessitated by fears about his eyesight or something, then he will remain a relatively anonymous figure, albeit that he's widely perceived as the one ultimately responsible for what is going on. Because it should be Keir Starmer who's ultimately responsible for what is going on. But you can't keep all the plates spinning single-handedly. And these communication failures, the fact that the confusion is not cleared up by the climb down. Well, that's a nice sentence. If the confusion is not cleared up by the climb down, then it's a catastrophe in so many ways, albeit that Ollie and other callers have put forward a more generous analysis. No one can deny that if the climb down doesn't clear up the confusion, it's a kind of lose-lose. Albeit we can hope it's part of a steep learning curve. Michael is in Leon C. Michael, what would you like to say?
Good morning, James.
Hello.
I am going to lead with an analogy first from the Friends TV show.
Carry on. Friends TV show.
Yeah.
Good.
So,
I love that.
At one point in the show, Chandler gets promoted from his office into a management position.
Hang on, just everyone pull up a chair. This is going to be good. Go
on. And he gets quite upset along the way because all of his office mates that he used to be really buddy-buddy with suddenly see him as the boss.
Ah, yes.
And he can't figure out why he still wants to be their mate.
Yeah, he wants to continue being the Bantosaurus Rex, and they're no longer his audience is no longer an audience of equals. It's all changed.
Yeah, and it's only when Phoebe points out, goes into the reasons as to why you can't be their friend anymore because you have to make all of these decisions and stuff, that he sort of accepts his position. And it kind of feels that that's what Keir Starmer's trying to do at the moment. He's trying... I do very much agree with your previous caller. It really feels like he's got the best interests of the country at heart. I want to believe he's doing the best he can. But it feels like he's also trying to be Mr. Popular.
But do you think he is? Yeah, well, I don't know about that. Because then he wouldn't have made these very, very unpopular pronouncements. I mean, by dint of the climb down, you could claim he was trying too hard to be popular, but it doesn't quite work on a Chandler Bing level because he wouldn't have done the thing in the first place. Chandler Bing got promoted. Keir Starmer announced these incredibly unpopular. He formulated and announced and championed these two incredibly unpopular policies, and then he climbed down on them. So who is he trying to be friends with? And in both of those moments?
So I think it's more of he's trying to be like... sorry, I've lost my train of thought.
Don't worry, I've got a question for you. What was Joey doing?
I guess the answer to that is who's Joey in British politics?
Who is Joey Tribbiani in the Labour cabinet? This is what we all need to know. Find Joey Tribbiani, put him on the telly. Thank you, Michael. John's in Reading. John, what would you like to say?
Morning, James.
Hello, John.
I wanted to try and mix what I see a connection between the winter fuel and PIP payments.
Go on. Are you going to do so using Dad's Army as the basis?
That would be awesome, wouldn't it?
Go on,
so my connection, what I think is that Keir Starmer is so long-term looking. He can't look short-term. He can't look at what is happening right now. So you can look at, for example, an increasing pensioner population. You can look at what happens to pensioners when they get older. They get frail. They get disabled. They get more likely to claim more PIP. So you can look at the scenario basically where he's going, right, we have a decreasing working population. We have a population that has voted consistently for anti-immigration. I could use a really good example, if you had time, James, for Japan. Is a perfect example right now where they have a low immigration levels. They have a decreasing birth rate to the point now where their population is dropping. And we're heading to that point. Keir Starmer's basically gone, right, long term, we need to basically get the birth rate up.
How do you do that when you've got people like Farage standing in the wings shouting about immigration all the time? And ignoring the demographic change to pensioners or the falling birth rate, ignoring all of that. It's primary schools shutting in this city at the moment, literally shutting because there's no kids to go to them.
And I'm going to say something, James, that you're not going to believe. I'm going to say something positive about Trump.
Go on. Oh, really? The last person who tried to say something positive about Trump, I actually told to shut up on the radio, which was probably quite unprofessional of me. But luckily, I said it in a very bantery way. So let's see if that happens again. Go on.
So what's the main thing that Trump has? He has a spokesperson that is there 24/7, talking to the press 24/7.
Oh yeah, okay. Yeah, well that's the office of the United States president.
Exactly.
It's not just him, but that notion of communication, that window on his world. Even though they're lying through their teeth, the principle is a good one, to have somebody there.
So, James, for example, you've got Labour MPs who come up on LBC, you can't tell you where a bridge is, but you've got Labour MPs who come on other days who are amazing, and it's the single problem that the Labour Party has at the moment is comms, it's communication, it's explaining to the general public that if we do not have the money to spend on pensioners and on PIP, we're going to have to prioritise who the money goes to, and for a lot of Labour MPs...
Yeah, but why don't you just take it off the billionaires?
Because... that's the problem. You're trying to explain it to the general population.
I'm showing you what the general population is primed to say. If they come from the left, you say, why don't you just take it off the billionaires? And if they come from the right, you say, well, they're all scroungers anyway, so what are you worried about? Exactly. Why aren't you getting more of them? Why aren't you taking more? You're not taking enough. They're all scroungers. I know someone who's got a Motability car and he's only got, I don't know, he's only got an ingrown toenail, so they're all scroungers. They're all So you see the problem, but you're right. They need to try, but it doesn't matter how big the mountain is, you've got to try to blooming climb it. And they haven't even got their crampons on. Thank you, John. 11:01.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 5 minutes after 11. Who else is just going through their calendar at the moment, having just been reminded that Wimbledon starts on Monday, trying to work out what they can cancel next week in order to park themselves in front of the telly for the duration? What's that? Just me, is it? Oh, I love Wimbledon. Absolutely love it. But I digress. And you can tell sometimes when I'm about to move on to a story that I find really unpleasant or unbearable, because I come back from the news and go off on a completely pointless tangent like that. It's subconscious. I only picked up on it quite recently myself. Listen, I'm always going off on pointless tangents, obviously, but not at the top of the hour, almost like I'm trying to postpone the unpleasantness that is about to unfold. I don't think we have any choice but to talk about this story, and we talked about it at the time, and the horror that I feel, the sickness that I feel hasn't changed at all. Let me quote to you a young lady who was 15 years old when she became the focus of national news. She says today, "I can't go a single day without wanting to scream, shout, cry, or just give up. I don't know if I'm going to feel normal again, but I do know this can't happen to anyone ever again." What is she talking about? I'll let her tell you. "Someone walked into the school where I was supposed to feel safe, took me away from the people who were supposed to protect me, and stripped me naked while on my period." This followed her arrival at school for a mock exam when teachers believed that they could smell cannabis and called the police, who took her to a medical room and strip searched her while teachers remained outside. No cannabis was ever found. I've been doing this job now for 20-something years, and I've never sat down to make a list of the stories that hit me hardest. I probably should one day. I mean, some of them are flipping obvious. Grenfell Tower, that was man. July the 7th. Came on air thinking there'd been a power outage on the London Underground. By the first 10:15, I think we did travel news on the show at the time, by 10:15 we knew something absolutely heinous had happened. So those are obvious, right? Those are really... But this one, something that's happened to one person. One person. This story was absolutely sickening to me, and I don't use words like that very often because I want them to be accurate, not hyperbole. It actually made me feel sick, and it still does. It's an So 2 police officers who were involved in this have been dismissed after being found to have committed gross misconduct. That there were 3 officers involved in this ordeal. One was a trainee, and then one was a PC, and then there were 2 PCs, 1 woman, 1 man. The man, in particular, is described as having taken a leading role throughout the interaction with school staff and this child, known as Child Q. He, of course, was not present in the room where the strip search occurred, but the tribunal has found that he pursued a leading role. The only one not to be dismissed is the trainee detective constable, who you have to presume went along with it because her superiors were in the driving seat. I'm not suggesting that you should have any sympathy for her, but I find it possible to conceive of the fact that she was as shocked by what she was witnessing as you were when you heard about it. So I still don't know how this could have happened, and that's the question I'm going to ask you, but let me expand on that a little bit. There are so many ways you can answer this. You can answer this as someone with experience of policing. You can answer this as someone with experience of being policed. Do you see what I mean? I just cannot understand. Do you know, for me, and this may be evidence of my own privilege, the bit of the story that I find in many ways hardest to countenance is that it was cannabis. Cannabis. Nobody there, whether the teacher or the police officer, actually stopped to say, well, look, even if she has got some cannabis on her, I don't think that really justifies stripping her naked while she's on her period. Whether she's on her period or not, let's be clear, but that just adds an extra dimension of horror to the whole story, right? We're really going to do this to a teenage girl, to a child? We're going to do this to a child? What, now? In her school? I can't believe it. I was expelled from school for cannabis offences. I don't know if I've ever told you that. I may have mentioned it a few times. I was expelled from public school for cannabis use. I was never actually found with any. It's a long story. I'll tell you if we ever meet in a pub one day. I'll give you the full details. But I haven't got the words to tell you how certain I am that this would never have happened to me. The interviews took place. We had to go up to the school in the school holidays, and the interviews took place in the headmaster's study. And there were some big old coppers there. I always remember that they sent some of the big people. They quite like getting their teeth into public school boys for perfectly understandable reasons. And if my dad was waiting outside, bless him. Well, if someone had said, I can smell cannabis now, it's going back to 1990. If someone had said, I can smell cannabis now, we're going to have to conduct an internal examination. There's no way they would have been able to do that. There's no way. Look, the headmaster couldn't wait to get us out of the place. We were expelled before we even got into that room, before we even conducted our interviews with Humberside Drug Squad. You could tell from the faces of the other parents that the decisions had been made about who was going to carry the can for this whole business. But the idea, and I was an 18-year-old boy at the time. I was an adult, actually, wasn't I, technically? There's no earthly way they would have strip-searched a public school boy on school premises, even though he was actually in the process of being expelled. And a couple of my schoolmates were charged with possession offences. So how did this happen? And that I think, I know you sometimes think I talk about myself too much, but I think this is really relevant, actually. Because that is the point. I've only just realised this, talking to you now. This is the point at which I can't believe it happened. So look, there's some privilege involved. Obviously there is. But that doesn't dissipate my utter despair at what was done to this child. I cannot begin to understand how it happened. Can you? 0345 60 60 973 is the number that you need. How could this happen? How could 3 police officers and, I don't know, let's say half a dozen teachers have countenanced this? Could a teacher have stopped it from happening? I presume so. There was no teacher present in the room, which is apparently the legal requirement. I find that almost impossible to believe as well. If they were looking for a bomb, if they thought she was a suicide bomber, then yeah, okay, I guess some of the niceties of the interaction have to be sacrificed. But they were looking for cannabis. Looking for something that at the time was legal in a whole bunch of American states and European countries, and which you can smell everywhere in this country, can't you? We can agree about that. You can't go anywhere these days without smelling weed. And yet it gave these adults, these 3 police officers, and let us say half a dozen teachers, none of them stopped it from happening. And I want you to tell me how you think it happened, because this middle-class, expelled from public school man cannot believe that this could happen in his country. You can, and you're going to tell me why. 0345 6060 973 is the number that you need. And the search took place while teachers remained outside. I'm not clear. I'll double check on the legal niceties of it. But I think even if you were to accept the suitability of this behaviour, which I am not going to do, I don't think, in a million years, then the law would require, or the rules would require, that a teacher, a trusted adult, was present in the room where it happened. This poor, poor girl. I can't go a single day without wanting to scream, shout, cry, or just give up. I don't know if I'm going to feel normal again, but I do know this can't happen to anyone ever again. How did it happen? What do you think happened? What broke? What failed? I'm going to speculate, because they've been dismissed for gross misconduct. So PC Rafal Smidinsky, who appears to have been the prime mover in this story. He's found to have led the interaction with school staff. So I imagine that he was overbearing and aggressive, perhaps, to the point where nobody wanted to stand up to him. I'm just giving you an example of what you might use to explain to me how you think this could happen. So you've got someone who's overbearing and a bit aggressive and in uniform. And teachers, I think, presume, call it blue helmet syndrome. Teachers presume that because he's a copper, he must know what he's doing. I'm not going to... I mean, how many of us here would actually say to a copper in our workplace or our school who's arrived with at our invitation to say, oh, I'm sorry, I know we asked you to come here and deal with this, but we didn't mean like that. It's a bit like a plumber turns up and you start telling him how to fix your toilet. You just don't do it. He's a policeman who's turned up to do policing, right? So we'll just let him do his policing. The trainee... How many of us as trainees would have stood up to a senior member of staff, a senior colleague, and said, no. And then the other PC who has been suspended, PC Victoria Ray, I don't know. That's possibly the pivotal point. And then the 6 teachers or the 4 teachers standing outside. Thinking, well, I mean, you know, he knows what he's doing. He knows what he's doing. She's 15. She's 15. They also failed to ensure that an appropriate adult was present during the search. They failed to obtain senior officer authorisation, and they failed to provide the child with a copy of the search record. They also did not respect her rights as a child. They did not respect her rights as a child. Why not? 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. 17 minutes after 11 is the time. How did this happen?
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 19 minutes after 11. You are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. And I'm not alone, obviously. Nicola writes, I remember when this story first came out, I was listening to you on LBC. I'm a community nurse, James. I was just about to go into a house to see a patient, and I had to sit in my car for a bit as it upset and shocked me so much. It sickened me to my stomach then, and it does so now. It's just disgusting what that young girl had to go through in her own school. It's hard to believe. My thoughts are with her, and I hope this never happens again. I may have some bad news for you on that front in the course of the next hour, actually, but we'll see. Nadia's in Redbridge. Nadia, what would you like to say?
Hi. So having taught in a few East London schools, I feel like what has happened here, I'm a teacher myself, a secondary school teacher, and unfortunately there is this phenomenon of often highly educated white teachers who have been brought up in kind of the suburbs or other places around the country who come to teach inner London kids and have this mentality that, she's a young black girl, of course she's going to have some weed on her. There's that concept called adultification where young black children are treated essentially as adults and treated much harsher than their white peers. And I've seen that happen day in, day out. And I think that must have happened in this case where if she had been a young white girl,
hello.
I think the story would have gone completely differently.
The panel has found that race was not a factor in the police officer's decision to subject her to the search. You will be sceptical of that finding, and similarly it was found that it was not found that she was treated as an adult, which I find odd, but we weren't there. You describe, and I hadn't mentioned the ethnicity of the schoolgirl, not necessarily deliberately, but I think many people will find it hard to separate that from the way that she was treated, and that phrase adultification is a huge part of it. What about what about the police? So I can understand how the teachers, as you described them, and I don't know that they were all white and middle class or from the suburbs, but let's take that theory as reality for the purposes of this conversation. What about the police themselves? I mean, this the point at which that they closed the door and began this hideous dehumanising process. That I don't understand how anyone could have gone along with it, could have carried on with it. Whatever your preconceptions about 15-year-old black girls might be, we just can't do this. We can't do this. No one said that. That's the bit I don't get. I mean,
I agree, but I think
and maybe we never will.
My point, I think, is that it could only have got to that point
if the teachers had behaved in the way that they behaved. There may well be something in that, actually. There may well be something in that. All I can say with certainty is there's no earthly way I would have been strip-searched when I was in an almost identical situation to this 15-year-old in a very different school and coming from a very different background. Sam's in Acton. Sam, what made you pick up the phone?
I picked up the phone, James, because this happened to my daughter last week.
Oh, no.
It was really, really triggering, and actually the words that my daughter used was being violated. So I'm really unwell at the moment as well.
I've got that. I'm just getting better from that same little bug, I think, at the minute.
It's awful.
It is, isn't it? Is it a tickle right in the back of your throat? It's like someone's got a feather. And they start torturing. Anyway, I'm trying to put you at your ease because this isn't going to be easy. Tell me from the top.
Yeah, it was. Do you know what? So I remember this story, and I actually went on the demonstration at Hackney Town Hall because I felt so moved by it as a parent. But never did I think that something similar would happen to my own child. So she's 14, and last week I got a call. I'd just like to state she's well behaved. There's never been any incidents. But I got a call last week asking me to come into the school because on the back of this child queue incident, I drummed into both of my children. I've got a son that's 17 and she's 14. Do not allow yourself to be searched at any point by anyone unless there's an appropriate adult in place. Do not write any statements unless there's an appropriate adult in place. And that's something that I've drummed into my children off the back of this and all of the news reports. So 9 o'clock last week, we got a call saying that my daughter had come into school smelling of cannabis and she was refusing to be searched.
This wouldn't have been a strip search, would it? Do we think? I mean, I think only the police can do that. So it would have been teachers just going through her pockets, probably. But
and her person, because they wanted to see where this cannabis was concealed.
Yes.
I said no, absolutely not. She's told you the right thing. I'm at home. I'm going to come to the school.
Yeah.
Unknown to me, because they said, oh, let me put you on speaker so you can speak to her, because I wanted to reassure her. But what the school did, they put her on mute. So I was talking to her. She was talking, but I couldn't hear what she was saying, which I thought was really, really sneaky of the school. And this only came out later on when I had an opportunity to speak to my daughter. And what she was saying is that she was isolated from the 2 other students. So 3 of them walked into school, the school gates. 3 of them got called by senior leadership to come into the school office because they had smelt cannabis on them. The 2 girls, I'd like to say they were white girls and my daughter's black. They were all 3 of them separated. The 2 girls corroborated in their stories and said my daughter was in no way involved. They just happened to see each other at the gate. They're known to each other, and they happened to walk through the gates. They said
so the 2 girls, the 2 friends had been smoking.
Yeah, the 2 friends had been smoking. They admitted that they had bought it from school. They allowed themselves to be searched. The cannabis was found on them, but they refused to let my daughter go unless she had been searched.
So her friends are saying she's nothing to do with this. We only bumped into her around the corner. We were already baked. We were already stoned. We'd already finished smoking. Exactly.
So when we arrived, one of the things, and this is where you're saying, how could these things happen? It's because innocence isn't afforded to black children. And this is what I said. Obviously, I'm taking it further. And I know from speaking to your researchers, we're not mentioning the school. But what I was really, really upset about is one of the safeguarding leads said to her, well, how did you not smell the cannabis? Did you not know that they had smoked? And she said, of course not. I just ran into them as we were going through the school gates. But they refused to believe her story, even though she'd never been involved in anything like that before. As I said, she's a high-performing student. She's a well-behaved child. But that innocence wasn't afforded to her. So I had to explain to the lady, look, we're not that type of family. If my daughter's saying she doesn't know what cannabis smells like, you need to take that as her word. They searched through the bag. They found nothing. And then, you know, it's been left. They wanted a statement, which I said, absolutely not. I will be taking this further and writing a complaint, which I have done, and we're wanting this to be investigated. But for me, it is the fact that young black children aren't afforded innocence. And this whole child queue thing started from the school.
That's the thing that's so heartbreaking about it, because you should feel safe at school. Even if you're a bit naughty, you should feel safe. And obviously your daughter isn't. Has that been taken away from her now?
So she said to me that she felt violated. She said prior to me arriving, they continually forced her to be searched, which I'm really happy for her that she stood her ground. And one of the words that they kept saying to her is, oh, you're being really defiant. You're being defiant. Even though when I was there, they praised me for drumming into my children to know their rights. So it was that whole contradictory thing. And it was all around trying to not prove, trying to get her to be searched and hoping that they would find something in her. And I think for her, what she was upset about is that all of those teachers are known to her. And she said they all treated her differently. It wasn't, oh, we can't believe you're caught up in this incident. Actually, now we can see that you're innocent. We're really sorry. But it was more, we want to prove that you were part of this, and we're disbelieving what you were saying.
I'm sorry.
And it's really marred her experience at the school. You know, she's really depressed. She doesn't want to go into school.
But what if Mum hadn't done such a great job in the first place? What if?
And this is my whole point. If I hadn't said to her, don't allow yourself to be searched, don't write a statement. Children can be easily suppressed, as they were trying to manipulate her by saying, you're being defiant. Obviously, a child doesn't want to be defiant. You want to follow the school rules and policy, and my daughter's like that. She doesn't like to be in trouble.
For the avoidance of doubt, You were simply seeking to ensure that she didn't end up in a similar situation to Child Q, and the Child Q story shows us that without knowing your rights, you can end up being violated in the most hideous way. So she is deeply bruised, even traumatised by her experiences, but they're on a different level entirely to what happened to this poor girl, and it's precisely because her mum had equipped her, you had equipped her with the knowledge that she needed in the face of authority, even though it would have been uncomfortable for her. That's why you're mentioning that she doesn't like, defying, for want of a better word. She needed that knowledge to have any power whatsoever in that situation, and Child Q had none. She had no power whatsoever, and it breaks my heart to think about what happened to her, and I'm so sorry about what happened to your daughter, but thank the Lord that you were on your toes both before, during and after the incident. Keep in touch, Sam, actually, when if and when you want to go into further detail or you feel the school isn't dealing with it in a satisfactory way. Sometimes a little bit of attention can hold feet a little closer to the fire than we can manage on our own. Oh, man. How do you think it happened, knowing what you know as a police officer, or indeed as a mum or as a pupil? Knowing what you know, how could this have happened? The various stages in the story, the teachers maybe, even more than the police officers. Safeguarding. Every school has a safeguarding lead, doesn't it now? What does that even mean? You'd have thought they'd be fired first, wouldn't you? You're head of what? Safeguarding. And what happened in your school? 15-year-old girl on her period was strip searched in a room with 2 police officers and no responsible adult accompanying her. You're head of what now? Thomas Watts has your headline.
James O'Brien on LBC.
34 is the time. What I cannot fathom, writes Dave, is the teacher's reaction. You'd have to arrest me before I'd let anyone, minor or adult, be sexually assaulted just feet away from me, within screaming distance. The size of the bully has nothing to do with standing up for what is right. You tried detaining a 15-year-old girl against her will, stripping her naked and examining her intimately. I think you'd spend many years behind bars, and quite rightly. What was happening outside the room? What were the teachers saying to each other? And listen, I'm not going to argue with anybody who is persuaded that this has a distinctly racial dimension, but I have to remind you the panel found otherwise. They describe it as a disastrous and negative interaction between police and a black teenager, but concluded that race had not been the reason Child Q was treated so badly. The search was, quotes, disproportionate, inappropriate and unnecessary, and it was humiliating for the child. So, how could the teachers have countenanced this? You're a teacher, you tell me. What do you think happened? What do you think happened? Jeffrey's in Clapham. Jeffrey, what would you like to say?
Yeah, I know about this. My sister went to the school many years ago. I'm a Hackney boy, born and bred, and I know the school well.
Okay.
I'm born and bred here, and I happen to be black. And I use the word happen to be because you don't choose what you are what you are. And then you have the experience of what that can mean to other people. Now, why I say this, you wanted to know how this happens. When you think of a person, if you use the word person, and we all use it, you have to think what that means to the majority. You live as an individual, but you live within a culture, you live within a nation, and you have your own premise and thoughts about how and what you feel about yourself. But you encounter other people's reactions to what you are. When you happen to be a person of colour, non-apparent Indigenous as I am, what you encounter is tropes of identity that apply to you. And then people lessen your value based on that. You no longer become a person. You become a person in a hierarchy downwards. That is applied to nearly everybody who is of colour in this country. That girl encountered it. You can imagine the teachers there all went to university, all had training. I know it. My wife's a teacher and 2 daughters are in teaching. But they happen to come from a culture that they are the majority. They have an ideology that has been indoctrinated and by osmosis received.
Could a black teacher fall victim to the same osmosis?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course they would, because they are seeking to have their identity accepted.
Well, also, it's class and race. You can't ever really separate one from the other.
Yeah, it is class and race applied, but you have to look at where people see people like black people as a trope. Anybody who manages to be educated, speaks in a certain way, is seen as being exceptional rather than being who they are.
And yet, Sam, who was on just before the news, defies any stereotyping or tropes, and her daughter much better behaved than some of her friends of different ethnicities, and yet still getting targeted in a way that fits your analysis.
Yeah, but what she cannot do
is not be
even
black.
As an individual, she cannot transcend that. She can transcend it as an individual in actuality, in her being, in everything about her. But when people meet her, what she experiences is their decision of what she could potentially be. And when those teachers called those officers, that girl, Q, was treated as a young, black, defiant, obstinate girl who they thought had weed on her, and they then applied what you would apply to anybody who had weed and was being defiant and being criminal. And adultification is not applied because she is different in their eyes. It could be permitted to happen because she was not wholly a person in their eyes.
That's heartbreaking and completely
what
compelling.
I wanted to say,
go on.
It is like living an individual who lives here. Remember, we're only 3% of this population of 68 million. It's like living in an open prison. You're either performative, where you're trying to be exceptionally good, or if you stand up to the way that you're treated and being treated in this way, you are defiant.
You're a troublemaker.
And either way leaves you in the worst position of not being able to be what anybody wants to be, is themselves. Now, I don't say that anybody struggles not being themselves, but can you imagine wearing a football strip that you can't take off and you're in the opposing team's end?
How do you account, and you may not be able to, for the panel's conclusion that race had absolutely nothing to do with this incident?
Because there is the belief in this nation that calls itself fair and just. You've got to remember the cultural tropes. I'm deeply embedded in this culture. I'm in it and of it. I call myself non-apparent indigenous. And the non-apparent means that people ask me where I'm from, and I say London, and they go, originally.
Where are you really from?
So I'm deeply embedded here. What I want to say is this.
Go on.
You believe you're fair. This culture believes it's fair and open-minded and just. And to accept the premise of the actual act being permitted by teachers, who will be predominantly white, educated, and probably middle class, and then a policeman being given the identity and how to treat that girl by them. They set the premise for her to be treated in that way, and they, in their analysis and coming to the conclusion, are quite willing to say that it was wrong, but to accept the reason that instigated it is too much for the British psyche to accept. And until the majority of people, because you've got to remember, James, you will hear much more racism than a black person will in your lifetime, right? We receive it from the extremist, but the ordinary person who holds views negative towards people of colour will not ordinarily speak it, knowing what will come back on them. Okay,
yeah.
But until the majority,
I think life's getting a bit easier for them at the moment, Jeffrey.
Yeah, and quite right. I'm hearing much more, and to some degree, I like that. And you may find that a bit obtuse.
No, I don't. I can't say that because I'm not on the receiving end of it. But it
I want
gives
clarity.
Vindication.
I want to know who my enemies are.
Yeah.
I need to know who my enemies are, and I need them to declare. But one thing I will say, in me saying everything I said, I hold myself to account as a man. And why I say this, I'm asking misogyny to change changes because I have to intercede. It can't change by women asking it to change because they don't hold the power. And therefore, if I'm willing to hold myself account, I hold whitedom to account. And whitedom doesn't really exist. There are no white sorts and there are no black sorts, but there is white experience and there is black experience. And that girl was treated by whitedom as a thing, as less than. And when they've come to the conclusion that by the book, those officers and teachers acted wrongly, they cannot hold themselves to the true account of what permitted it to happen. And it is that we are people. We don't need your permission to be people. You do not decide our value, but you do every day.
Wow. Thank you. I don't think I have anything to add to that, Jeffrey, or any questions to ask you. Can I compliment the power of your advocacy?
You know, James, I'm a human being. I know you are. I listen to you, and I know you get it, James. But I've been waiting a lifetime. I'm a Hackney Downs boy who went through the education process in this country to be nothing. And what you hear is me screaming back, I'm something.
You certainly are. Take care, and thank you. Seriously, you won't be surprised to learn that you have your words are resonating with everybody listening in a quite extraordinary fashion, which is as it should be, because you expressed yourself with extraordinary clarity. And I'm grateful to you for helping me to understand and giving me the confidence, actually, to say that there's no earthly way this panel could have correctly and completely transparently concluded that this incident had nothing to do with race. They are incapable, perhaps, of contemplating the possibility for the reason that Jeffrey highlighted so completely. And the reason why I didn't interrupt him as much as I interrupt other callers was because he was answering my questions as he spoke. And the only one I wanted to clarify was whether or not a black teacher could be subject to the same process, as it were, of indoctrination or osmosis, as he described it, that hierarchical notion of humanity. And of course, they can. It's 11:45.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 11:48. I suppose there's some comfort in realising that we're almost all confused by this, confused in part by elements of this story, albeit that Jeffrey's analysis and other callers have removed some of the confusion about how it could happen or why it could happen. But the detail of it remains utterly impenetrable for many. Lorraine writes, as a former deputy head teacher of a large comprehensive school for many years, I cannot understand how the school allowed this to happen to one of their students. Safeguarding requires strict search policies and procedures to be in place, which put the well-being of the child at the centre. Who is asking the questions of this school? And I would add, and indeed of these teachers. And a little advert for the LBC app. Ray's been in touch to say that's the first time I've actually rewound live radio in order to listen to a contributor twice. So there you go, the power of technology. Laura is in Purbright. Laura, what would you like to say?
I just want to say, Jeffrey, wow. I feel like I could talk to that man for hours.
Me too.
So, I mean, I'm not a first-time caller, but I may have spoken to you before. I'm an ex-police officer. I was in the Met just short of 14 years. I joined in 2004 when I was 19. When I went to training school, it was 18 weeks, residential, in Hendon, in North London. You were in the classroom Monday to Friday. You had from 8 till 4. You had exams on literally everything. Because when I first heard this story, my instant thing was, you have to get authorization from an inspector.
Yeah.
How do we? And you have to have your. You have to have. You have to have your reasons. You can't just go, I'm going to strip search that person. You can't.
How do we distinguish between malice and incompetence, or malice and inexperience? I mean, maybe we can't. I mean, the job of the panel is to find gross misconduct.
Stacey, I'm so angry.
I can tell.
About that this child has been put through this. It's wrong. There is no other way to put it other than it's wrong. But I'm also angry at probably senior management that was sat on that panel. I'm angry with the commissioner. I'm angry with the government because there is no... Hendon has been sold off. There is no Hendon anymore.
So you're making a much broader point about police training and the fact that to turn up...
But there isn't any... This is the thing. I left when I just short of 14 years.
See, I'm sometimes a bit dismissive of old coppers telling me that everything was better in their day, but I think that would be a mistake in your case.
I resigned for my own mental health and well-being. Having joined so young, I'd joined on the 1988 pension, which meant I'd do my 30 years and then go and get another job and carry on paying tax.
Sure.
There was a Tom Windsor did a report into it and decided that you had to stay until you were 65.
Let's not get sidetracked. The training today, you think would explain... Hang on, let me get the question out. The training today, you think would help explain how these officers could even have contemplated the course of conduct that they followed on that day?
Well, the retention of...
Because they'd not learned better.
No, I don't think they have learned. I don't think there has any been... I think, yes, they do some training at Hendon, which is now a quarter of the size it is. There isn't any residential. They have to rent their own property or commute.
Right, again, I hear you. And I mean, it certainly fits some of the available facts, doesn't it? One of them was still a trainee. So what guidebook would she have been following if her seniors and superiors were telling her that this was the way to conduct this kind of encounter? Absolutely unbelievable. But that distinction that Laura's thrown up there between malice and incompetence, very hard to determine. And I think under Jeffrey's analysis, malice is almost an inadequate word to describe a kind of entrenched, a baked-in attitude among people in authority towards black girls, black children. Yasmin's in Morden. Yasmin, what would you like to say?
Hi, James. We've spoken before. I'm a assistant head teacher in a special needs school for children with social, emotional, mental health difficulties. I'm also the designated safeguarding lead. And I was mortified that it had happened to Child Q, but I wasn't surprised in the slightest. I believe that lots of it boils down to how people talk about children and semantics of language use, and it's across the board when they describe children as being prostitutes rather than victims of sexual abuse.
Yes.
And so our children are specifically vulnerable to contextual harm, so of being sexually exploited, criminally exploited by gangs, because they've got invisible disabilities. They are misinterpreted and not understood. So I sit in lots of meetings with police officers and with social care, and I'm explaining that this child who happens to be involved in something is being exploited and they are vulnerable to contextual harm, rather than them being a criminal mastermind. Having called the police myself to protect children and put them into protective custody, for example, the police turn up and they want to treat our children as if they are criminals.
Grown-up criminals.
And they turn up and they're angry and they are not. And I've had to challenge some of my police colleagues and say, please don't speak to him like that. I don't expect you to. I've called you here because he's the victim of a crime.
This is the point.
You have to be quite assertive.
Yeah, and no teacher in this moment were they? So they didn't do what you would do. So, and that, I mean, I can see why you're not surprised by elements of the story. Are you not surprised that no teacher stepped in and said, "Whoa"?
No.
Why not? I am. I'm very naive, as we've established many times in the past, but I can't believe there wasn't a single teacher there who would just say, unless this copper was like, RoboCop and everyone was frightened of him, someone surely would have said, no, she can't go in there unaccompanied.
You'd like to hope that there would be somebody who would do it. I'm lucky. I've got 20 years experience. I've got absolutely no problem challenging professionals. I've had all my safeguarding training. I know what they should be doing, and I can be quite forthright in asserting myself for my children and advocating for them. But the profession doesn't have this level of experience. People leave teaching, and so you might have someone who's a designated safeguarding lead who's done it for 6 months.
Right.
You don't know.
So it's your turn. It's your turn now. Where you've stuck your house. Someone's got to do it, and I'm volunteering you. The head teacher might have said.
Yeah, and that's it's a lack of they're not applying safeguarding law. It's very
what
clear.
about convictions, as in moral convictions, not criminal convictions? So Jimmy's been in touch. I think this is important to pick up on some of the things Rachel said a moment ago. As a serving police officer, you don't need training to know that strip searching a young girl without an appropriate adult present is wrong and outrageous. I'm with Jimmy on that. But what about the convictions of the teachers, even if they haven't got the right... they haven't been on the right courses. I mean, if it was here, in a radio studio, I'm pretty sure I would not let that happen. And yet in a school full of people, full of adults who've dedicated their professional lives to caring for children, they all let it happen. I can't get past that. I can't understand that. I don't know if I ever will, Yasmin.
I don't think I did. I once heard a head teacher who spoke about there's plaques outside French schools, and sorry, this sounds like it's not relevant, but it is.
Go on with it. Go on. I'll be the judge of that.
There are plaques, and it's about World War II and how many Jewish children were taken from these French schools with the permission of the head teacher to then go to concentration camps. And there was this big responsibility that they've then taken for, we allowed these children to be taken to concentration camps. And as head teachers, we should never have allowed that to happen. And it's about that changing culture of senior leaders are completely responsible for the entire school community. And whether other professionals come into the school or not, it is your responsibility to safeguard those children and prevent that from happening. But that is not the norm. I think that it's a changing culture. It's a protection that head teachers have to be very strong in, and very because actually it's not really just a designated safeguarding lead. The head at the top is the head teacher who allows what happens on their school grounds.
I mean, I don't know. I may have missed it, but I don't know that anyone on the teaching staff has been disciplined or dismissed even for this. Do you mean just as a person, rather than as someone with your professional perspective? Well, but you can't separate the two, I don't think. Do you think someone should have been? I mean, if this was my man alive, if this was my daughter, I'd want someone to be fired for this from the teaching.
Of course you would. So it would have been referred to the local designated safeguarding lead at the local authority, and they would have had to investigate the professionals involved in allowing this to happen. And so the local authority will have done an investigation, one would hope. But absolutely, it would have been dealt with then, because it is a failure to follow safeguarding procedures. And then someone's head should have rolled as a result of that.
You'd certainly hope so. And not least because the abiding mission of any investigation or inquiry into anything that it strikes the massive majority of the general public as unacceptable and unbearable is to prevent it from happening again. So, you know, I just, in terms of a deterrent, making people think twice before going along with something like this out of self-interest. Hang on a minute, someone lost their job in Hackney a few years ago in a situation like this. Maybe I haven't quite got the confidence to step up on entirely altruistic and principled grounds, but if I have the fear of losing my job thrown into the mix, maybe I'll find the courage to step in and say, stop it. Oh dear. And that's what Child Q said. I do know this can't happen to anyone ever again.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It's 3 minutes after 12 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. I'd missed this. I don't know quite how I'd missed it, but Natasha Clark, our political editor, has just sent me a link to a really, really good piece in The Guardian today. Or no, on the Observer website today, forgive me, by Tom Baldwin, former political editor of The Times and Keir Starmer's biographer, and it's a really deep dive, a really big sit-down interview with Keir Starmer, which speaks directly to the last 2 days of this show. Some of the stuff we've been talking about on this show, some of the stuff we've been trying to work out and wrestle with. And obviously I haven't been able to read all of it yet, but he's a great writer, Baldwin, and that is and he's got unparalleled access to the Prime Minister. So if you are, as we talked about in the first hour today, interested in actually understanding things, and if you understand things and decide that someone is not for you, that is such a more important and powerful position to be in than not understanding things and deciding that someone is not for you. I hope that's obvious, but I do wonder sometimes. Vinny's going to be pleased. He goes, James, are you still doing that name change phone-in at 12 o'clock? I think it will be a mix of serious and hilarious, and I think we all need a laugh after a pretty heavy news week. Everyone's a producer these days. And speaking of producers, a young man, I call him a young man. I sound like Donald Trump then. I call him a young man. A young man who once produced this radio programme, not very often. He was one of the sort of relief producers, for want of a better word. He would step in when the regular producer was on holiday, and we're going back a long time now, a very long time. He has got his first feature film opening in the cinemas today. So I thought that it would be a timely moment to invite him back into the studio. He didn't even work in this building. That's how long ago it was. He'll be with us shortly. On that Palestine action story that you just heard in the news bulletin, Fraser Knight has secured a very strong exclusive story. I don't really want to provide any spoilers, but it will be very, very uncomfortable listening for that man again, Sir Keir Starmer. And my guest on Full Disclosure this week, from which I will play you a little clip later, is Michael Lewis, the author. I mean, one of the most significant non-fiction writers of his generation. You'll know him for a whole bunch of books that he's written, many of which have been filmed. Moneyball is one of them. The Blind Side, which was made into a film, wasn't it, with Sandra Bullock, and The Big Short. Possibly the biggest impact would be The Big Short, the kind of insight into the world of finance. He's a truly fascinating character, and it's a really good interview. And in fact, it began, I sometimes say to interviewees at the beginning, this isn't an exercise in gotcha. I'm not trying to make you say anything that you will later wish you hadn't said. I might do that on the radio if I interview you, but Full Disclosure is a very different environment. And he said, I love saying things I regret. So you can find out later whether or not he did. And finally, Dave has been in touch to say, why does your Donald Trump impression sound more like Brian Clough? Young man. It's because I said young man, isn't it? That's why I said young man. I can't do impressions. It's one of the great tragedies of my life that I can't do impressions. One of the great tragedies of my life is not my name. I quite like my name. I like my name because it was my dad's name. And for many years, my dad was Jim O'Brien, and I would be James. And then, when I got to school, I got called Jim. And for years, whenever anyone said Jim O'Brien, my first thought would not be, oh, they're talking about me. It would be, why are they talking about my dad? And then when I got to university, I reverted back to James again. But I've always liked the name James. I went through a period of wishing I'd been called Seamus, which is the Irish version of. Or rather, James is the anglicised version of Shane. Well, it cuts both ways. Anyway, when I was going through my plastic paddy phase, which I still am, I quite fancied being called Seamus. I thought Seamus would have given me a little bit more, I don't know what I want, romance, a little bit more mystique. The producer's just written on the screen, how is James like Seamus? Look at the blooming words, would you? Literally look at the words. Ian is the Scottish version of John. That's how, I don't know why, that's how names work. Why are you quizzing me on this? I'm trying to set up a phone-in. Honestly. This is a phone-in about people who've changed their names, okay? And I'm going to give you the top 10 most changed names in Britain. And I thought that the names would... But then, of course, there has to be quite a lot of them to get you into the top 10. So if you've got a rubbish name... I mean... Just thinking out loud about the kind of people that might ring in, you might have spent your whole life with a perfectly innocuous name, and then something happens, which means it's not innocuous anymore. As my old mate Freddie West was telling me just the other day, there's a few things worse than suddenly when your name big. So that might be one reason. But my initial thought when I got this research, when I got these statistics, my initial thought was, how can that be the most changed name in Britain? Surely you'd be much more likely to change your name if you were called something like Adolf. Or if your parents had thought it would be funny to call you R2D2 or something like that. But there won't be lots of R2D2s, will there, or Adolfs, so you're not going to be the most... in some ways, the most changed name, statistically, is likely to be among the most popular names in the country. And for many, many, many years, my name was the number one name. They used to do, I don't know whether it was like all registered births or whether it was just the births column in the Daily Telegraph, but for years, James was the most common, there you go, common or popular, both, old boy. James was the most popular and common name for boys, for newborn boys. It hasn't been for a while, it hasn't been for ages, but it's the most common name. It's the most changed name in the country. I had no idea. The most changed names are you ready for this? James, Elizabeth, Michael, Susan, Andrew, Rebecca, Thomas, Mohammed, David and Sarah. Now, to me, those are all, unless you were sort of, I suppose, trying to avoid being attacked for being called Mohammed, which is something that sadly seems more likely to happen in this country at the moment than it did a few years ago. They are all utterly innocuous names. They are quite common as well, or popular, whatever you prefer. And I don't understand why, if you haven't got a name that is embarrassing, you would want to change it. 0345 6060 973 is the number you need. Your producer writes, Jonathan, should know that Abrahamic names have a version in all languages preceding classical Greco-Roman names. Well, exactly. Of course they do. Those are the top 10 changed names. And then you get the top 10 adopted names, like the new names, which, I mean, they could almost be interchangeable. So the most adopted names, the names you are most likely to adopt if you change your name, and this is by deed poll. It's not just becoming like a nickname. Oh, you can call me Al, or from henceforth I'd like to be known as Jimmy the Moocher, or something like this. This is an actual deed poll thing. The most popular new names are Alex. Why would anyone change their name to Alex? Like, if you're going to change your name, change it to something like Jake or Seamus. But these are all really normal and ordinary as well. Alex, Olivia. I love that name, actually. Charlie, Elizabeth. So Elizabeth is the second most changed name and the fourth most changed to name. Why would you do that? Alexander. I know no one has changed their name from Elizabeth to Elizabeth, but it speaks of a kind of social attitude to the name Elizabeth that doesn't make sense to me. Ellie. Change your name to Ellie. Ellie's not a name. So it's an abbreviation. It's not a name. Ellie. Robin. James. James is the 8th most popular new name. So more people called James want to change their name than any other name. And it's the 8th most popular new name for people not called James who want to be called James. A new name. Why did you change your name? 0345 6060 973. Jay. That's like Ellie. That's not a name. Jay is not a name. I'm taking no prisoners. That's a bridge I'm prepared to die on. And finally, Rose. Rose is a popular new name. So why? I've done quite well today. I've got to 12 minutes past 12 before my throat has started letting me down again. So just, if you could excuse me for one moment. There we go. I'm back now. Everybody relax. I've still got the same name. Why would you do it? Why would you change your name? And why did you? I'm not here to mock. I'm not here to judge. I just want to know why you changed your name. And listen, I'm doing that thing again. It has to be official, all right? It has to be by deed poll. It's not just, I spent years being called Jimbo, and now I'm called Jamity. It has to be by deed poll. You have that. This is only interesting if you have gone to the trouble of doing the paperwork. And I want to know why you did it. 0345 6060 973. The research was conducted by the mynametags.com company, and their analysis of deed poll data shows the other side of the coin to the 20-year-old tracking of new names. Charlie, Ella and Jay feature in the top 10. Why would you want to do it? Well, and listen, I'll mock you if you deserve to be mocked, but I'm not planning to mock you, because I'm interested in how you can feel so strongly about such vanilla names. These are vanilla names. These are all vanilla names. And how can you feel so strongly about a vanilla name that you actually go to the trouble and moderate expense of changing it? Is it like, I don't know, new name, new start, new name, new life, new name, new me, or more moribund, more humdrum explanations, or ones that I've never thought of at all? Names that I've never thought, reasons that I've never thought of at all. All I could come up with was either that you had a ridiculous name inflicted upon you by hippie parents in the 1960s, or your name became infamous. Your name, through no fault of your own, nothing you did, but someone with the same name as you became notorious long after you were born. So you thought, I don't want to be called that anymore. But that's an awful lot of fuss to go to. You just have to deal with it, wouldn't you? Every time you had to give your name to the doctor's receptionist, and you'd have, yes, I know, no relation. It wouldn't even have to be infamous. What if you were called Gary Lineker and you were born in 1940 and you just gone through your whole life but without anyone ever raising an eyebrow at your name, and then suddenly every single time you tell someone what your name is, you're going to get jokes and offered a crisp or whatever it may be. But you're not going to go to the trouble of changing your name by deed poll. At least I don't think you are. All right, what if you were called James O'Brien? Yeah, all right, I'd understand if you wanted to change your name. That's become infamous in the last few years. 12:15. Why did you do it? OK, 0345 6060 973. It's 12:15.
James O'Brien on LBC.
I mean, I don't know how much fun you can have with serial killers. That's a phrase that's going to have made you stop in your tracks if you've just tuned in at the top of the morning. But this is from Stephen, who's in Sheffield. The landlord at one of my locals was called Peter Sutcliffe. I would have been quite tempted to change my name if I was him. I don't know, but that might be a reason to do it. I want as many different reasons as possible as to why people would change their name, because I'm struck, and I shouldn't be, because it makes sense statistically, that the most changed names in the country are utterly innocuous. I can't even think of an infamous James. All right, I can think of one, but he wasn't known as James. Let's start with Max, or is it Max? I don't know. Max is in Catford. Max, what would you like to say? What can you tell us?
Well, just to reassure your producer, I do have the certificate with the red sticker on it, so good. It's officially Max these days. But now I was born on Good Friday, so my mum said that the reason she chose Mark was she wanted to use one of the four Gospels, so it would have been Matthew.
What's she telling
Mark,
the
Luke,
truth? Sorry, carry on. Yeah. So you could have been you could have been Matthew, Luke, or John, but she went with Mark.
She went with Mark because she thought John was too common.
Yes,
and
popular,
and
Max, popular.
Yeah, Matt and Luke were a bit out there, but she liked Mark.
How old are you?
64.
Oh, okay. So it's nothing to do with Bros. That she didn't reject Matt and Luke. She could have called you Craig. Anyway, carry on. So she went with Mark.
She went Mark. She actually never gave me a middle name, so I was just Mark. Which I hated because I couldn't shorten it. Well, if I was christened Matthew, I could have been Matt.
Yeah.
Right? But being called Mark, it was Mark or Mark.
Marky?
And,
Marky Mark.
Anyway.
Yeah, you're right, actually. You can't, because diminutives are often affectionate, aren't they?
Yeah. So I went to my mid-20s, and I studied engineering at Polytechnic. Decided at the end of that I didn't want to be an engineer. I wanted to be a journalist.
Okay. Oh, God.
So exactly. So I got myself a sort of internship writing advertising features on the Western Sunday Independent in Plymouth.
Yes.
And I was on the news desk there 3 days a week, and there were some journalists there that had been there for a long time, and I was much in awe of them because they were everything I wanted to be and hoped I would be, apart from the fact one of them was a girl called Wendy Pascoe.
Right.
Now, I'm 6'4" and quite broad, and Wendy was about 4'6", but I was really in awe of her. I really was. And she kept calling me Max all the time.
Oh.
So eventually I bucked up the courage after about 2 or 3 weeks to grab her by the coffee machine and say, Wendy, you do realise my name's not Max. It's Mark.
Yeah.
And she looked me up and down and she smiled and she said, but Max suits you much better. And I've been that ever since. And so... and
when did you make it official?
Well, this is it. For years and years and years, I was professionally Max, and the only people that called me Mark
were your mum?
Were either my mum or the police. Anyway,
hang on.
She died. She died 4 years ago.
Oh, your mum or
yeah.
Wendy?
No, Wendy's still around.
Your mum. I'm sorry for your loss, Max.
4 years.
I'm going to call you Mark once in honour of your mum's memory. All right. I'm sorry for your loss, Mark.
But you see, at that point, I thought, well, the pressure's off now. I can change my name. I'm not going to go against her choice. So I went through all the stuff, signed up for the deed poll, got it signed by somebody that I knew who was quite sort of high up, and it was all official. Got it back, and I've now got the bit of paper which says I'm now Max instead of Mark. In fact, actually, I changed my name to Max Mark surname, which means... I've got a middle name at last. It's just the old name. However, despite the fact I'm now officially Max, I still get loads of problems because I'm still signed up to things as Mark. People don't believe that I'm Max instead of Mark or Mark instead of Max. It's just confusing.
Why was it so important to you to? I mean, you just preferred it. I mean, quite an old age, but it was a newish job. You were kind of mixing with a new bunch of people. You could become Max quite convincingly and quite easily.
Well, and everybody's called me Max. Even my wife calls me Max. The kids occasionally call me Max. All the people I work with, I just thought I'd tied it up for once and for all, especially if I had signed up for anything and they'd say, what's your name? And I'd say, well, it's Mark. And they'd say, but everyone calls you Max.
And you just have to be explaining yourself all the time. And again, it's not, I mean, you didn't have a particularly boring or unpleasant name. Well, Mark's a bit boring. As you say, it doesn't lend itself to diminutives, which can sometimes be affectionate. Max is I don't know if sexy is quite the right word, but it's a cooler name than Mark, isn't it?
Yeah, there are more of them around these days. I keep coming across people that say, "Oh, I've got a son called Max."
Well, it is a pop. I've got. I know quite a few Maxes, but they're all quite a lot younger than me. I had a producer once. He went for Max E. He stuck an E on the end of it. So anyway, why would you do it? Some of the answers are obvious. Obviously, if you've changed gender, then you're going to need a new name. But we're looking for the stories a bit like Max's, where you are. Kind of doing it for reasons that are not immediately obvious to anybody observing. 23 minutes after 12 is the time. Here he is. He's got my name. Seamus is in Maidstone. Seamus, what made you pick up the phone?
Hi, James. So I've always wondered what it would be that would make me pick up the phone and have a chat with you. And it seems like this call was made for me. So, so I don't know what possessed me to change my name. I was 18 at the time. I was James. I'm half Irish on my mum's side, and I decided I wanted to get in touch with my Irish roots.
Yes.
So I came home from work. I announced to my mum I was going to change my name to Seamus. She suggested I maybe just take a holiday, go and visit the family instead. And then that night, when she went to bed, I went online. I changed it on deed poll.
Really?
The next morning, when I woke up, I just wouldn't answer to James anymore.
And that was it.
That was it, yeah. Although there is another piece to the puzzle. So I did have a middle name, which was Andrew. And unfortunately, I forgot to include my middle name on the form. So when the certificate arrived and I realised I'd lost my middle name, I gave them a call. I said, "Oh, you forgot to put my middle name in the certificate." They said, "No, you forgot to add it to the form." So I asked for it back and they tried to charge me 30 quid for it. So I just left it.
So you couldn't... Who were you named for? Where did the Andrew come from? Was it a granddad or something like that?
No, I think my mum just thought it was a nice name.
You couldn't find 30 quid to honour your poor mum's wishes?
Listen, I was 18. I didn't have a penny to my name.
And did it work? Did it make you feel... I mean, there's part of me that would rather be called Seamus, even now. I think it would look better on book covers and stuff like that, but it's too late for me. Did it work? Did it actually make you closer to your roots? Did you feel more Irish as a consequence?
Not really, no.
Oh dear! And it's permanent now. What does your mum call you if she's still with us?
She calls me James. The family call me James. Although interestingly, all of my friends have now called me Seamus or Shay. for short. But the family refused to get involved on that one. Fair enough.
No, and they also find it presumably slightly ridiculous.
Slightly ridiculous, yeah.
I don't. Seamus, I don't, mate. I get it. I see you. I get this completely. I'm tempted to give you a Ray Liotta, but I think it might cause a bit of a rebellion in the ranks because it's only really relevant to me, this story. Do you have an apostrophe? I know it's your mum who's Irish, so you don't have an apostrophe in your surname?
No.
You're not called something like very un-Irish, are you? Like Blenkinsop?
Actually, more of a Scottish-sounding surname. I don't know where that comes from.
No, but that works. That would work quite well. I mean, I think it would need to have a Celtic feel to it, the surname, for the Seamus to really land. I don't know. What am I saying? I love that. There you go. I mean, it is Ray Liotta territory. Someone called James. But I'll tell you what, I've never done this before. Seamus, come back. I'm gonna do a Ray Liotta, but we're sharing it. All right.
Great.
Because half of this is actually mine, because it's only in the context of my dreams as a younger man that you actually lived. You lived my dreams, Seamus. So we're going to share this Ray Liotta.
I'm Ray Liotta, and you're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. You build it. They will come.
They will come. You see, I said to the producer, we'll get the calls. We'll find someone who fits almost all of these things. My mum called me Seamus when I was growing up, actually. I've just remembered that was part of my emotional connection to the name. That was one of my pet names. Yasmin's in Cambridge. Yasmin, what made you pick up the phone?
So I changed my name when I was actually at primary school. So I took a real disliking to my name and didn't like what it was being shortened to. So I was originally called Samantha. They used to abbreviate it to Sam. It was in the days of a particular page 3 model that was around, and I really disliked it. And Yaz, I think it was the Plastic Population, came around with the song "The Only Way Is Up." Absolutely loved it.
1988.
My mum.
1988.
That's it.
Yeah.
I said to my mum, "Can I change my name?" And I've been Yasmin ever since.
And you've done it officially, or just
absolutely all by default? No. So the only people that ever referred to me as Samantha, if I was ever to see them when I go home to the Midlands, would be my old dinner ladies or primary school teachers.
What year did you do it? Did you do it on the move from primary to secondary, or did you turn up at primary school one day and say, "I'm called Yas now. I'm called Yasmin now"? That's
exactly what happened.
You quite I have to use a word I wouldn't use only for a little girl. I don't want to sound sexist about it. So I think forthright. I don't want to say feisty because no one ever calls boys feisty. Do you see what I mean?
No.
You knew your own mind, didn't you, Yasmin?
I did, and I still do.
That's incredible. And your mum was quite relaxed about it.
Yeah, it turns out that it was a toss-up when I was born between Samantha and Yasmin anyway.
Oh,
and she
really?
went with Samantha.
Oh, okay.
Absolutely. And she never knew I was going to end up saying, "Can I please change my name, Mum?" But then actually my siblings, 2 of my 3 siblings have gone on to change their names by default as well.
All right, if I was your mum, I'd be feeling a bit persecuted. Yeah, I really would. I mean, actually, that's really rude. Your poor mum. She goes, forget it, call yourself what you want. If she did have another one now, I know it's biologically unlikely, but she'd say, "I'll just wait a few years and let you pick your own name. I'll call you number 4. I'll call you number 4 for a while until you're ready to stick a tail on the..." I love that. And I love that song, actually. That's a big song for me.
It is one of my favourite songs. And I actually got to meet Yaz about 3 years ago at IBC Festival in Windsor.
Did you tell her the story?
I did indeed, and I've got my photo with her as well.
How did she respond? Because, I mean, it's quite a weird thing to tell someone, isn't it?
I know, I felt a bit like a stalker.
She gives that smile. She does that smile I do when someone says, "I've written some poems and I've brought them for you, James." You go, "Oh, that's nice. That's nice."
It was one of those, quick photo, right, we'd better get away from this weird woman before something happens.
I love that story. I love the idea of you being so certain of your own feelings. And I guess everyone associated in that period, everyone associated the name Samantha with Samantha Fox, which for a little girl at primary school may not have been a very felicitous association. It's coming up to 12:30. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. Tim Humphrey has your headlines.
James O'Brien on LBC.
It is 12:32 and you are listening to James O'Brien on LBC. This is nice. No, I always say to you, if you want me to read out your text, then be sure to begin it, even if it's critical, by saying, "I love you, James, but..." It's the best way to get your text on the programme. This works as well. I've just discovered a new way you can attract my attention. Dear James, I have nothing to contribute to this conversation. Who's not going to read on? That's a perfect little teaser. I have nothing to contribute to this conversation other than to say that my husband, Will, and I, Alex, are on our way to our 20-week scan and will be finding out the gender of our first baby. Oh, how exciting. Thank you for this very well-timed conversation. Lots of possibilities being struck off the list. That's lovely. And actually, Alex, you remind me, Corpsey reminds me in a message on Blue Sky that Alex is possibly at the top of the list precisely because it's one of those perfectly androgynous names. For any non-binary or trans person wanting to lose their birth name to recognise their identity, Alex would work particularly well, perhaps. I don't know, but that's Corpsey's suggestion. We will return to this rather jolly territory shortly, but before that, as I mentioned to you a moment ago, Fraser Knight has got a rather good story, actually, that I think is going to be a slightly uncomfortable listen for Keir Starmer. Fraser, what's going on?
Yeah, James, I've been speaking to a veteran activist who all through her life has been campaigning against war and against genocide. And what she's been telling me is that the prescription that's coming in, the banning of Palestine Action as a protest group, is going to have a chilling effect for protest groups all across the UK. But it is her connection to Keir Starmer, which is very interesting.
Let's build up some more tension, shall we?
I like tension. It's her connection to Keir Starmer that's really interesting, because in 1998, when he was a human rights lawyer in his 30s, he actually represented Andrea Needham and 4 others at the European Court of Human Rights, and that was over arrests that had been made in the UK during a number of protests.
So Keir Starmer was our barrister. We went to Strasbourg for the case to be heard, and he was arguing that this was an infringement on our freedom of speech, and we won that case. I mean, he seemed to be very passionate about it. I mean, I in retrospect, I suspect he was just doing his job and doing it well, because the way that he acts now in terms of, the way in terms of foreign policy and domestic policy, makes me feel that he really has no moral compass whatsoever.
Andrea telling me that she feels like the Prime Minister's views and morals have shifted so far since then that she's lost all respect for him. She says that she's concerned that while he represented her at the European Court of Human Rights, he'd now see her as being a terrorist, because in her eyes, the government is shutting down legitimate protest over the war in Gaza right now by Palestine Action. Now, earlier this week, James, that activist group was described as being organised, extremist and criminal by the Metropolitan Police Commissioner after the alleged attack that we saw on 2 RAF jets at Bryce Norton last Friday. The group had claimed responsibility for them, and we've heard today that 4 people have been arrested in connection. But in 1996, Andrea had broken into a defence plant and smashed up a plane that was due to be sent to the Indonesian military. This was while attacks were taking place on East Timor, which are now recognised as being part of a genocide. Now, interestingly, a jury found the Ploughshares 4, as they were known, not guilty of criminal damage after they had argued that their alleged crime was to prevent a much greater one of genocide. But Andrea Needham told me she's concerned about the fact that now that could be considered terrorism.
When we were arrested in 1996, we were charged with £1.4 million worth of criminal damage, but it was simply criminal damage. There was never a hint of anything other than this is just a case of criminal damage. Terrorism would have been, nobody even thought of that. Obviously, I would still do it again, but the consequences now are much, much graver. We were looking at possibly a few years in prison for criminal damage, but if you're prosecuted under the Terrorism Act, you're looking at a huge sentence.
What an extraordinary parallel you've unearthed. I'm genuinely gobsmacked. Because I thought originally, I think the case that went to the European Court of Human Rights was more to do with freedom of expression, but this is a second case that she was involved in that has really irresistible parallels with the latest events.
Yeah, and there are really, she's concerned about the fact that if that was to happen, you heard her say there that she would do it again. I spoke to another member of the Ploughshares 4 as well, who said that she also would do it again. And I've challenged them, sort of saying, if you are making comparisons here, you could be charged under the Terrorism Act after Monday. And they have said that is what really concerns them. But actually, they've also raised questions about how enforceable that ban on Palestine action is going to be, because they claim hundreds of thousands of people will continue to show their support for that group. They're suggesting essentially overwhelming the criminal justice system. And I've had, for example, a spokesperson for the now disbanded Just Stop Oil telling me that they expect their members, most of them, some of them, to still be out on the streets supporting Palestine action even after they've been prescribed. Now, of course, the Home Office has said that the group has a long history of unacceptable criminal damage, and its activity is getting more severe and aggressive, with Yvette Cooper set to put down that order to prescribe them on Monday.
Do we know what their membership is?
Palestine Action doesn't actually have a way of signing up and being an official member, which is part of the question around how this will be prescribe it. Yeah, how this will be policed. We have seen people using the slogan "We are all Palestine Action," right, including some MPs. Zara Sultana, for example, the now suspended Labour MP, she's posted on social media a couple of times, "We are all Palestine Action." And while that is more of a hint towards all protest groups being affected by this move, because what they're saying is this won't be the last. That's their concern, that other groups who take non-violent direct action will also end up being prescribed under the same sort of conditions. There are questions of, if you say that slogan after Monday, after this group's been prescribed, are you going to have action taken against you?
Have you put any of this to Downing Street?
We have, yeah. We are waiting for Labour to get back to us with a comment in terms of Keir Starmer's position. And the Home Office didn't want to give any further comment other than what Yvette Cooper has already said in the House of Commons in a written ministerial statement, talking about how much this group has sort of escalated their actions in the past couple of years.
Just thinking, what year was it that Andrea broke into a...
1996.
1996, so just towards the end of John Major's. So what was an act, what could be an act of terror under Keir Starmer was not an act of terror under John Major.
They were arrested and charged for criminal damage at that point, yeah.
That's a great story, Frank. Can I ask how you got it, or would that be unprofessional?
It's actually our duty editor, Angela Wormold, worked together with her to track down these people.
And credit where it's due. It's an absolute storming story, that, and particularly embarrassing, I think, for the various iterations of Keir Starmer. This is the sort of crusading human rights lawyer running headlong into the, some would fear, increasingly authoritarian Prime Minister. 20-1 is the time. Back to the question of names. And is it Shakespeare, Fraser? Is it What's in a Name? Is that Shakespeare? Is it What's in a Name? I forget. Am I getting confused? Anyway, Paige is in Watford. Paige, what made you pick up the phone?
I'd like to call because I changed my name about 10 years ago by deed poll from like a pretty average name to another pretty average name.
Paige isn't average.
To me. Well, it's even less average, I guess, because it's actually an old surname, so it doesn't have the I in it. But I did forget that it was actually a normal girl's name.
So, talk me through this process then.
So, about 10 years ago, so my name was Claire.
Right.
It was Claire Page. And everyone called me Paige or Paige, no one really called me Claire. Oh. And I had this, aversion to Claire because I'm adopted, and my parents used to tell me the story that when they adopted me, I had a more Spanishy sounding name when I was born.
Okay.
So I was Antonia.
Oh, yes.
And it was a different time, so they wanted me to sort of blend in with Britain more, so they said, we'll call you something really boring.
Antonia was the name you'd been given by your birth mother?
Yeah, Antonia de la Diaz, so it's much, more...
And she was Spanish, clearly?
Yes, yeah.
Okay. Okay.
So when they adopted me, and they obviously wanted me, they're a white family, or British family, sorry, yes. And they wanted me to to blend in. So they said, why don't we just call her something boring like Claire? And that's how I was told.
Really? They literally told you? We decided that you needed a boring English name, so we went for Claire. I've got a Claire in my family. I don't think there's anything boring about that name at all.
I think it's because my mother wanted to call me like Martini or Paris, so in comparison, it was boring.
Martini. Any time, any place, anywhere. And so that. Okay, so yeah, fine. So then it would make perfect sense. So you're actually onto your third name now. Why did you decide to do it formally? What made you make the sort of leap into formalising it all?
I think I just was sort of tired of meeting people saying my name was Claire and then be like, oh, but everyone calls you
just having to explain yourself all the time.
Yeah, and it was actually so easy. I know you had to go through the fuss of changing it, but it was. You went online, changed it online.
Yeah, no, it is really easy. And I mean, these are all, every explanation we've heard is perfectly reasonable, isn't it? It just actually makes, I think those of us who've never changed our name would presume, with the exception of my new friend Seamus, we would presume that it introduces complication to your life, but everybody else's story involves actually removing complication from your life by changing your name.
Yeah, it just means I don't explain myself. And I also got to pick like a whole new name. So I got to pick my first name from like my father, my middle name from my birth parents, and then my surname was my mother's maiden name, which turns out wasn't her maiden name, but I thought it was her maiden name. So so I got to like pick one from sort of each parent, and something that just, I don't know, just represented me more. I felt like I just was never a Claire.
No, and does it? I mean, it hasn't obviously had a massively profound impact on how you live your life, but do you feel a little bit different now that you are officially Paige?
I feel like, I mean, now it's been 10 years, so, you know, but at first, when people just address me as like Paige or Paigey even, I did feel like, because I think Claire, I'm not a very feminine woman, so I felt like Claire felt so wrong when people would meet with them. And people were like, oh, you're like Paigey, and I was like, yeah, it feels so much more me. I mean, I wasn't devastated by the name Claire, but
no, I get it. I do. I think it's one of those things, isn't it? That it's going to be very much in the eye or the ear of the holder, of the name holder, and it just feels a bit inauthentic, or it feels a little bit wrong. It's coming up to 1:45. You're listening to James O'Brien on LBC. So up next, I think a first on the programme, one of my former colleagues has written a feature film, or co-written a feature film, which you will be able to go and see this weekend, and it's rather good, and so I thought you might want to meet him, and you can after this.
James O'Brien on LBC.
47 is the time. Culture Corner now. Not only am I going to point you towards my guest on this week's Full Disclosure, and that will involve, of course, reminding you of some of the works that he has written. Liar's Poker, which is one of the best introductions to the madness of the city, based on his years his time as a Bond salesman at Salomon Brothers. Included a period in London as well. And Moneyball, which you'll be aware of, The Blind Side, and The Big Short, perhaps most famously. I speak of Michael Lewis, the author and journalist, contributing editor to Vanity Fair, and an absolutely fascinating guest on Full Disclosure. And, of course, a very sage commentator on American politics.
Did you ever read Lord of the Flies? You remember when Piggy gets tossed off the side of the cliff, his glasses get ground up? It feels like that. It feels like the bullies have rolled in and destroyed something sweet and good-natured. And that the society's gotten so vicious, it's tolerating a kind of cruelty that just makes it causes your whole body to kind of tense up. And it's the ugly moment is what it feels like. So there's that on the personal level. It's sort of that. There's an existential dread that it's. If you ask me what's going to happen because of this, like what are the bad things, I don't know exactly what, but one way to frame the U.S. government is as manager of a portfolio of risks, and we're pretty obviously not managing them as well as we could, and it's getting worse every day. So it feels like a bit like someone has run around a bomb factory lighting a whole bunch of fuses, and it's very hard to see how far it is, how long the fuse is, so how long it will take, or which bomb will explode, that the fuses are all kind of tangled together. But it feels like a lot of fuses have been lit. And there are little things that are already happening that people aren't paying that much attention to, but here's a telling one. Well, a few weeks ago in Kentucky, there was a tornado. It ripped through town and people didn't get their tornado warnings that they might have expected to get, and a bunch of people were killed. It turned out the reason they didn't get their tornado warnings is Doge had fired the people who actually blasted those warnings out. And oddly, like, you would have thought that would be a major news event, like, oh, this is the consequence. It's not how it played. It's sort of like, oh, that's unfortunate, as opposed to they killed those people.
Why is that happening?
Why is it interpreted that way?
Well, yeah, why is
it's a really good question. I think it's partly the way we're wired, that when something doesn't happen, it's harder to imagine that, oh, it should have happened. When something does happen, if you get caught, I don't know, stealing money from the federal government, that's very easy for everybody to get worked up about. You see them doing it. When it's a kind of neglect, it's hard. I think it's just harder for people to imagine, oh, that wouldn't have happened if. I don't think people make that leap. And it also happened in a part of the country that voted for Trump, and they're very slow to want to think these thoughts. Like, I got killed because of Donald Trump. This very slow. So it's predisposed. It's a kind of willful blindness. But I imagine more things like that happening. And the question is, like, at what scale? And at what point do people say, oh, wait, if we had a government, that wouldn't happen?
Michael Lewis, my guest on Full Disclosure this week, and that's just a little flavour of what is a truly fascinating conversation. One of those interviewees to whom I didn't really have to say much. You never know until you sit down. One of the hardest things to cope with in an interview is people who speak in packages, and they just stop speaking, and you haven't actually formulated your next question yet. And he certainly wasn't like that. It was the opposite problem. It was like, I'm going to have to interrupt him, even though he's been fascinating, because he's been speaking uninterrupted for 4 minutes. We move now from one cultural icon to another. Patrick Dalton is in the studio. Perhaps not a name that will be immediately familiar to everybody listening at the moment, Pat, but you did once produce this programme for a few brief spells.
For a few brief spells, yeah, and then I left and your show got exponentially better. I'm not sure whether the two were linked at all.
Do you remember any highlights from those years?
Oh, none that I could really repeat. I wouldn't want to bring them back, to be honest. But you've certainly gone up in the world, because, I mean, it looks like the Starship Enterprise in here.
It is, yeah, it's state of the art, isn't it? So it's all the contractual requirements and all of that. But you didn't just work here, you worked at BBC Radio 5 Live as well, but you were always a frustrated writer, I think.
Definitely.
Starting off with something I can't actually say on the radio, but you first achieved notoriety for putting together a photography project which focused upon the less salubrious parts of London and was named, not, sadly, the less salubrious parts of London, but Bleep London.
Yeah, that came out of me finishing working in radio and deciding that would be a really good time to try and write my first novel. So obviously I failed at that. But I used to take myself to the British Library and try and write in there. And then it wasn't working, so I found myself wandering the streets just taking pictures of funny things that I saw. But then ended up being archived in the library anyway.
Yes,
so good.
I mean, and achieving great popularity and such. Yeah. I mean, for people who don't know, it rhymes with bit. Bit London. It was a big thing. It was huge. Still going, is it?
It's still going, but I walked away from it because it required too much admin.
You have to be going at it all the time. People would send you pictures. So anything that was comical or noteworthy or shocking, and in London would appear in the collection. But that is not why you're here. If you had just written your first film script or your first produced film script and one national newspaper decided to describe it as having echoes of Shane Meadows and the Coen brothers, I suspect you'd have to pinch yourself. But that is exactly what's just happened to you.
Yeah. I am pinching myself at the moment. They've got a very kind Guardian review as well, calling it endearingly daft for a crime caper with a lot of knob jokes.
Can he say that?
Can I say that?
Sorry.
I
thought you were a radio producer.
Dump button. I know.
I haven't got that.
I'm really sorry.
He's quoting the Guardian. He's allowed to quote the Guardian. We don't have to say sorry. He was quoting the Guardian. The Guardian should say sorry. No, all right. We couldn't do it with Donald Trump. Yeah, but that is how the Guardian have discussed. Anyone offended by Patrick Dalton's language, I apologise profusely.
I'm sorry. This happened the first time I went on radio as well, actually. Okay, I swore I wouldn't do that. Anyway, but that's the Guardian. But yes, I am pinching myself today, and it's it's lovely that it's finally coming out, because it's been a bit of a labour of love over the past few years.
Chicken Town, how long does that labour of love go back? I mean, how do you move from sitting in your garret, toiling away with the co-writer and director of the piece, to actually getting a film made?
It's probably been about a 6-year journey.
Holy moly.
And we've been writing together for a bit longer than that, but nothing's quite taken off. So working with director Richard Bracewell, who this is his 5th film, but the last film, which I think a few of your listeners probably might have seen, was Bill, the Horrible Histories movie, based on the life of Shakespeare, which was excellent. And
did it suffer from a... Was there something unfortunate that happened in the terms of the studio or the company, the distribution company?
There was distribution trouble with it, so it wasn't released at the right time.
Exactly, because we went to see it, my daughters and I, and we absolutely loved it and couldn't understand why it hadn't been a much bigger hit. But there were completely unfortunate and uncontrollable circumstances.
I think it was supposed to be released during the summer holiday, but ended up being released in September or so. But it's gone on to attain this cult status.
Absolutely,
it's a wonderful film.
It's a cracking film.
Yeah,
and well, you should tell us A, what the premise of Chicken Town is, and B, where that idea came from.
So the premise of Chicken Town is we were looking for the unlikeliest criminal that we could get, and we thought, what about a retired granddad? And this retired granddad sort of accidentally on purpose acquires a shed full of cannabis plants and enlists the help of 2 disaffected local teenagers to help him fence it. And it's all set in the Fenlands and around Norfolk, and it was all shot in Norfolk, and it's endearingly daft.
Which bits of Norfolk?
So it was filmed mainly in the environs of Norwich, just around the outside of that, Corston, Old Catton, places like that.
Yeah,
and it was wonderful filming there. There's so much talent up there. It's a wonderful county.
I saw the people that used to work for Anglia Television. Yeah. Have you you had a premiere, I think, in Norwich itself? Probably the first film to premiere in Norwich since Alan Partridge's film.
The second world premiere that Norwich has ever seen.
Congratulations.
Thank you. Yeah. It's quite an achievement. But no, it was fantastic. Really great Cinema City there. Full house for that. And then we had a gala screening in Nottingham the other day, because the core cast from the Television Workshop in Nottingham, which has produced stars like Bella Ramsey, Samantha Morton, Vicky McClure, and this young cast are just incredible. You wouldn't believe it was their first movie. It's they've really done us proud.
And of course the old guard is represented by Graham Fellows, better known, I suppose, as John Shuttleworth, and for older listeners, Jilted John of Gordon is a Moron.
Yeah, and
fame.
Alongside Graham, we've got Larry Rickard from Ghosts, who you might know as the caveman Robin. And we've also got Alistair Green, who, if you spent any time on the internet, you probably would have seen his
The Room
funny
Next
videos.
Door.
Exactly. Oh, no, that's Michael Spicer.
Oh, forgive me.
Alistair Green, he does these little bit characters. And
of course he does, yes.
Yeah, Statlet's
exactly
Flats, and he's done some ghosts as well. He's fantastic.
What was it like to sit in an actual cinema the first time and, A, see your name in the credits, but perhaps more importantly, see your vision in glorious Technicolor? Because being a writer is a lonely old business. Most projects, particularly in film, never see the light of day. Even if you get paid for a script, a lot of people don't realise that there's absolutely no guarantee it's ever going to be a movie. Quite the opposite, in fact. What was that just like for you personally?
A more terrifying experience than you might imagine.
Why?
Because when it's in your head and you've been working on something for so long, you lose all perspective. I wasn't even sure that it made sense. I'd seen it 15 times. I thought, is this funny? I don't know. I'm too close to it. You just couldn't see it, because you lose so many bits. You cut bits out. You have to rewrite bits. So it ends up being this sort of weird patchwork of what you originally intended, and then it's this amorphous blob before you, and you've got all the experiences connected with writing it, filming it, all there. You see every little mistakes, and I'm hypercritical of myself anyway. So it was terrifying until the first laugh,
and then
the laugh started rolling in, and then there's one particular laugh right at the end that got a huge round of applause, and I thought, okay, well, that's worked.
That's okay then.
So I can relax a little bit now.
Chicken Town is in cinemas today, and when does it go streamy?
It goes streaming in a month.
Okay.
If you want to get tickets, you can go to chickentownmovie.co.uk, where you can find listings and tickets. It's showing in London at the View Westfield all week, and across the UK in various cinemas.
Fantastic. Is it appropriate to say I'm proud of you?
Yeah, I'll take that.
I'm proud of you, mate.
Thank you very much.
Really brilliant.
Thank you.
Haven't even told the story about the time you went to a fancy dress party dressed as Jesus.
We'll save that for another time.
That could be your next movie. That is it from me for another week. If you missed any of today's show, you can listen back on Catch Up on both Global Player and the LBC app, where you can stay up to date on the top stories and opinions, put your news categories in the order you want, pause and rewind live radio and listen to a range of podcasts. So download the official LBC app for free from your app store now. Tom Swarbrick will be with you at 4 o'clock. But now on LBC, it's time for Sheila Fogarty.
James O'Brien on LBC.